Hey guys, what is up? Super K-Man Rocks here, and we are here for my LPL week number 3 overview and analysis video in the summer split. We are very much in the thick of things when it comes to the LPL now. We are cresting over the halfway mark in terms of the regular season already, which means we're getting a very clear idea of where Group Ascend and Group Nirvana are going to be sitting, where all of these teams are going to be. We're trying to figure out what teams are actually, contenders, what teams might be pretenders from the start of the split, and obviously who has, really kind of underperformed in a lot of different ways. We're getting very, very clear pictures of where these teams are landing and exactly how they're going to be setting themselves up for the rest of the year to try and qualify either for the World Championships or maybe even just the playoffs if they can. So obviously, I'm very excited to talk about everything here today. I know you guys are excited as well. If you are, let me know down in the comments section below. What did you expect from this week? What did you expect from the games that we got, the series that we got? Were there any players or teams that were maybe more exciting than you thought they were going to be? Or was there anybody that maybe underperformed your expectations? Always curious to know your thoughts and opinions down below. Obviously, small plug at the beginning of this video. If you like the LPL and you like my channel, well, I've got good news for you. I still am a color caster for LPL English. You can find the links to LPL English down in the description below. Both the YouTube and the Twitch are going to be down there. Highly recommend you go and check that out, whether it's because you want to keep up with the LPL live or even, the VODs of it, or if you just want to see how I analyze games live, maybe catch some of my casts. I would love to see you in chat over on Twitch if you can make it for the live broadcast. Of course, the Twitch link is down in the description. The chat is very lively. If you can't catch the games live, because obviously, you might live in the United States like I do, and the time zone's not exactly perfect to try and catch the LPL, then check out the YouTube channel where all of the VODs are housed. And obviously, I hope to see you in the live chat, but hope to see you at the LPL just in general. It's been a blast over there throughout basically all of this year with LPL English. It's been a really fun experience getting to cover the LPL, and it's definitely ramping up. I'm going to be on twice, as you can see up on your screen, over the course of this week, and like I said, I'll be on throughout all of the rest of the year as well. So definitely check that out if you are interested. But with that plug out of the way, let's get into the content itself. If you are new here, what we're going to do is go series by series, talking about the advantages and disadvantages that each of these teams was able to generate. I'll be giving a player of the series and a dud of the series for each individual series that we cover. And at the end of the video, I will be giving a player of the week and a dud of the week to tie everything into a nice, neat little bow. We'll be updating my personal power rankings from number 1 to number 12 at the end of the video, talking about whether or not teams are moving up, teams are moving down, whether I feel better or worse about potentially where they're sitting, and how I think that projects into the future. But most of the big conversation about the LPL will be saved for the end of the video. Most of today will be spent talking about the games we got in week number 3. So without further ado, let's get into things. Let's start off on day number 1 and start off with a pretty important matchup up in Group Ascend, just to kind of figure out whether or not one of these teams is completely doomed or whether or not they actually have a chance to turn things around. It was JD Gaming taking on LGD Gaming, and JDG does pick up the 2-1 series win. There's been a lot of conversation around JDG throughout this split up until this point because they've really been super disappointing. To be fair to them, they've had a very difficult schedule at the start of this split. They basically exclusively played the best teams in the league, and they've been able to clean up wins against the teams they're supposed to beat, at least so far. But this was the kind of week they needed to be able to punch their ticket in, to push forward in, because this is the week where you have some of your easiest matchups. Teams like LGD, and we're going to talk about some of their matchups later on, where JDG kind of have to win these in order to really appear like the team that they were supposed to be at the start of the year, a true Worlds contender. And obviously, this is a team that's been to an international already for the LPL. If they're not even in contention to try to be a top 4 team going to Worlds or something like that, then things have gone horribly wrong for JDG. For LGD on the other side, this is more the expected result. I think that there were a couple of players in this series that actually did play fine enough. Game number 2 was really promising from them, and they gave them a really good fight, gave JDG, I should say, a really good fight in games 1 and 3. They were definitely competitive. They just didn't really have the firepower to be able to overcome what was a JDG team that kind of locked in that final game. And of course, there's going to be a lot of criticism for the way that the game 3 draft ended up going, which I generally agree with. So let's go ahead and talk about it. Gala, for me, is going to get my player of the series on the winning side. You can't give Gala Kai'Sa in game number 3. That's just a brutal turn of events. I'm very low on Kai'Sa as a champion. I think she doesn't do nearly enough damage to justify the kind of priority that she's received in professional play over the past couple of weeks, but generally I understand why people really want to play Kai'Sa. You are in a dive meta. You're in a playmaking, pick-oriented style meta with things like Camille and Shen really popular in the bot lane. If not that, then it's Nautilus and Leona and Rel and Alistar and all of these engaged supports. You have really proactive junglers and mid laners that are kind of built to skirmish. This is the perfect meta for a champion like Kai'Sa that wants to be in these comps that can just dive dive under tower and, you know, just snowball games out of control. Like, make it so that if you generate resources in the early game, you can't catch back up. That is the perfect situation for Kai'Sa to try and play him, because she is so useful in late game team fights, even if you don't get a massive lead early. But if you do get that gold lead onto Kai'Sa and you are willing to play around her, you know, on strong side, then she can really break games wide open. Like, she is theoretically the perfect champion in this meta. The problem is, again, that I just think her numbers are way too low in the current state of, you know, the game. I think her laning phase is too weak. I think if you're going to play weak side towards bot lane, which a lot of teams want to do, especially when you're picking something like Camille, oftentimes she's not going to be able to survive in the 1v1 against any other bot laner, especially not an AP carry, but probably not an AD carry either. Like, she's just not a champion that I think does very well in terms of the overall, like, little things of this meta, because her numbers are a little low. But Gala is a different kind of beast on Kai'Sa. Like, this is his champion. This is the region for Kai'Sa to pop off, and you can't really give him his most comfortable champion in the third and, you know, most deciding game of this entire series. Gala, you know, unquestionably played his best in this series in comparison to what he's been throughout the rest of this split. I've been very, very harsh on Gala throughout all of 2026, but especially here in summer, where I think he is arguably the biggest reason for their slump. Him and Vampire just have not had chemistry in the 2v2. When Vampire goes to roam, he's trying to make plays on the map, and Gala is dying in side lanes. Jinja obviously hasn't been great either, which we are going to talk about. He wasn't even perfect in this series, but I think Gala has arguably been the worst player on JDG throughout a majority of this split, and I think to see him come out on Kai'Sa and on Corki in game number 1 as well. I don't want to, you know, overlook that game number 1 from him, because I thought he was also really important in that game. For him to come out in this series and just kind of take over in the way he was, you know, able to do, I think that's really important and really impressive for this team. He has to, at the bare minimum, be like a top 5 AD carry in the LPL if they want any chance of being able to go to Worlds. I don't know if he's hit that bar so far in 2026, but he's definitely hitting it right now, or at least he did in this series against one of, if not the weakest bot lane in Group Ascend, for what it's worth, but at least he was able to do it. I think there were other positives on this team. Hongq has generally been very good in the mid lane. I think he's going to get a lot more hate than maybe he deserves, because the team around him isn't doing particularly well, but he's been great in lane, and he's just not really gotten game states where he's able to take over games. Generally, I don't think he's making a lot of mistakes. I think he's been fine throughout a majority of these games. His team has been bad, so when they win, oftentimes he's also going to perform well. We'll talk about Tung Yuan on the other side in just a second, but I think Tung Yuan has unfortunately not really been able to carry a lot of that form from week 1 over into week 2 and week 3. Jinja, I thought, was okay in this series. The Kiana game was not good in game number 2, and there's still a lot of cleaning up that he needs to do. I think his aggression has honestly been his biggest detriment. It's funny, because I was talking about this at the beginning of the year with Jinja, where I'm like, if he can just be a little bit more aggro, if he can just speed up his game a little bit, then I think JDG can actually be world beaters. And then he speeds up his game, and he completely loses all sense of control that he had in the back end of games. They have been a terrible team fighting team, which was something they were really good at the beginning of the year, and I think Jinja is a big reason for that. Still, the Jarvan and the Lee Sin, I think, were fine enough, certainly good enough to be able to win with. Vampire is starting to play his role a little bit better. I don't think this is a very good meta for Vampire, but he's figuring it out, I think, on the spot. Unfortunately, I'm going to be doing something that I don't do very often. In fact, I think this is the first time this split that I've done it in the LPL. I'm giving somebody on the winning side dud of the series, and that's going to go to Xiaoshu on the top side. He just was really bad across this entire series. His lane phase, his team fighting, he doesn't look comfortable at all right now, and I really don't know why. This is absolutely the time for him to potentially step up and be one of the best top laners in the LPL. I think some of his flaws over the course of this split have been overblown. I don't think he's been abysmal. I just don't think he's been nearly as good as he's supposed to be, considering there is no Bin, there is no Flandra, there's no 369. Like, all of these top tier top laners are gone. There is a gigantic hole at the top of the top lane rankings, and he should be one of the players that is trying to eclipse a lot of the other, you know, mediocre or like B plus B caliber top laners that are fighting for it. He's just not been able to do that, and I think this was another series where he just needed to be better, and he was a big reason why they almost lost this one. So he's going to get done of the series for me. I think he was pretty unquestionably the worst player on the Rift. Hopefully he can turn that back around, but thank goodness Gala actually had a good performance. Jinja, I think, wasn't abysmal here today, at least outside of game number 2, and Hongq, I think, has been consistent. There were still good pieces for JDG, and like I said, this is a big week in general for them. As for LGD on the other side, you know, some pluses and some minuses. They really took it to JDG in that game number 2. Like, they were the better team by a very clear margin. They got Xiaoya on his Draven, where he's just going to be able to pop off basically no matter what. Bertle got the Mundo, which I think was really strong on the top side, and Hung actually really got to take over that game on the Trundle, which was really impressive. Top side of the map in general looked very good in that second game. The problem was they just didn't have that same level of consistency in the final game of this series. I hate Nocturne plus Syndra. This is something that we're seeing actually pretty commonly as a duo in a lot of different regions. I don't really understand why. I get that Syndra can help facilitate picks, but Nocturne as a champion fundamentally needs someone that can dive with with him onto the backline. And if you're trying to get picks without Mbessa, then all of a sudden you don't really have anybody that can go with Nocturne. He's basically on his own on the backline, and Syndra is going to try and run up to deal as much damage as possible, but it's never going to be as consistent. I think we saw that lack of tempo in game number 3, and we're going to talk about that a bit more because it's not just one series that we're going to see this duo in. Xayah Leona in game number 3 is questionable. I think going into something like Kai'Sa Camille especially, like Leona makes sense as one of the few answers left to the roam potential of Camille, but I don't really get what we're doing with Xayah. Is it just to stop the dive combo from Jax, Lee Sin, Kai'Sa Camille? If that is the case, then your Syndra's just going to die alone every single team fight. There's literally nothing she's going to be able to do. Xiaoya was mispositioning in a lot of key ways. I don't think the Lucian game was very good from him. His good games look okay, but it's really just, is he protected? Yes, then he's going to be all right. Does he actually have to make plays on his own? Then he's probably going to be bad. So just kind of is the way that it is. Crisp, I think, has been fine. His problems, I think, have been overblown because the team isn't as good around him. But LGD is who we thought they were going to be. They're one of the bottom teams in Group Ascend, and JDG should be beating them in this series. I think the fact that it was close is a positive in favor of LGD, but JDG get a much-needed victory. This week should potentially be a 3-0 type of week for them, depending on how things set up. They kind of need to at least pull 2 wins out of this week, and they got off on the right track here by starting 1-0. Then moving on to our second series of day number 1, and another series that should have been a blowout, and this time it actually was. It was Edward Gaming taking on Top Esports, and TES are going to pick up the 2-0 victory. No major surprise or anything here. This was just a complete destruction for TES. Game number 2, I guess maybe took a little longer than you would want it to, but you're playing into Aatrox, Mundo, like Syndra, like you have so many tools to be able to delay games if you're EDG. They just never had a foothold in this entire series. The enemy jungler, TN in this case, went deathless in this one, which I think is a complete nightmare. That is never a good sign that things are going your way if you are the, enemy team. And obviously EDG have just been unquestionably the worst team in Group Ascend. I've continued to keep them out of the number 12 spot because LNG has somehow been equally as bad, just in a worse group, and that's obviously not ideal. But EDG are doing their absolute best to prove to us that they are the worst team in the LPL. They do make a change here. Jeje is in the jungle. We talked about this last week. Jeje and Xiaohao have been traded for each other. I said what I said in that video, which was essentially Jeje is the better jungler, but it's not by like a ridiculous amount. Xiaohao was unquestionably the best player on this team throughout all of the beginning of this split, especially with someone like Leave performing so poorly. Maybe ZDZ has had some moments in lane, but I think that's like reaching in my opinion. I think he's been fine. He's certainly been passable, but he's not been good for this team. Xiaohao was the only player actively generating any sort of leads in the early game, and you've gotten rid of him to potentially upgrade in the jungle, and maybe Jeje can come in here and be more of an aggressive piece. Certainly didn't work here in series number 1, but you never really know. I think EDG is probably beyond saving regardless of who is in here in the jungle spot. And for Top Esports, they certainly took advantage of the lack of chemistry from this team that is making a substitution in a pretty pivotal role, as TN just ran the entire series. He is very clearly player of the series. He went 9-0 and 25 across 2 games here. Having 0 deaths as Vi and Skarner is either the sign that you were by far the best player on the Rift or by far the worst, right? There is no in between. You're either actively making plays on that champion and surviving anyways because you're just so far ahead, or you're not getting involved in anything, and it was the former for TN. He was absolutely the best player on the Rift here today, and getting so much gold onto Jackie Love or Cream or Zwayon or whoever he needed to get gold on was really, really easy for him. The Vi Ahri duo obviously made a big impact in game number 1. It's funny, this game 1 draft is very split one from Top Esports. They just kind of went back to the well of, what everybody was playing at the beginning of the year, and then, game number 2 I think was definitely a bit more of this standard kind of comp where you play around this Lucian Milio in the early game. The Skarner Victor is there for scaling, and the Renekton can kind of do whatever you need him to do. In the back end here, you don't really have a ton of tools to be able to break through this Dr. Mundo if things go especially late, but EDG never had a foothold in that game, as I've said before, and so that gold lead was just way too big for Dr. Mundo and Aatrox and all of this innate healing to be able to overcome. TN was awesome. I mean, the Vi was incredible in game number 1, just completely obliterated that early game and spiraled things out of control so quickly. And then game 2 on the Skarner, this is how you play Skarner. This is a, primo tank game where you're just not passive in the early game. Like, one of the things I really criticized Top Esports for going back to last week is it felt like they had lost their edge in a lot of different ways. This was a team that was overly greedy throughout a majority of the beginning of this year, and that was a big reason why they found so much success in the LPL. And I think a lot of that got kind of sapped out of them when they lost at MSI and lost all all of that confidence. They were playing really scared. They were giving over objectives. Basically, they were the antithesis of what they were good at the beginning of the year. And I think turning that back around, getting that aggression back in, that has been a massive plus for TN. That has been a massive plus for Top Esports. I just need to see them do it against top teams and not just EDG. They will get the chance to do that later in the week. Everybody else on TES was also very good. Cream was definitely better than Bulldog. Not that that is a big bar to clear, which is something we're going to talk about. Jackie 11 Chwo, I thought were really solid here. Leave actually got a bit of gold, but for the most part was also inconsistent in terms of his positioning, as he always is, especially when he has to play something like Ezreal that has its own inbuilt dash. You know he's going to be using that to go forward, and you know he's going to be using that to kill himself at pretty inopportune times. Joao was fine here. Perukia was one of the players that I think had been playing the worst for EDG at the beginning of this split. It looked like he just was not comfortable at all with the rest of this team, and he continues to just not look very good on a lot of these engagers. He just doesn't seem to have any chemistry. It is hard to play support, you know, when the meta is Rel and Camille and you have a bunch of losing lanes, but the reality is that I think Perukia's lack of roam potential has really closed off a lot of avenues and opportunities for EDG to stay relevant in these games. And Zweyon, you know, we talked about Xiaoshu not really being able to fill that role near the top of the top lane rankings. Zweyon is kind of stealing that away from him. He has really been excellent across this split. He's been really fun to watch, and his laning stats are very good right now. So for Top Esports, it's a good look. Hopefully this team is starting to rebound. There were some major questions, but top 3 should be the absolute bare minimum for TES, and it looks like they're on pace for that. As for EDG, just not really a ton to talk about. Jeje coming in at least had some moments. His early games continued to be okay. That was basically identical to what was happening with Xiaohao, where Xiaohao's early games were solid, and then the team would fall apart in the late game because every lane was losing. I think we got very similar news here for EDG, which is Jeje perfectly fine, you know, made some plays, cross-mapped well in the early parts of the game, but at some point the gold lead is just too big in favor of the enemy team for you to actually make plays anywhere else on the map. And things just kind of fall apart. My biggest culprit is back again. Bulldog is going to get dead of the series once more. I've given him more dead of the series than anybody in the LPL. This guy just does nothing at an average level. Like, I just don't get it. I have to remind people, because I think it is really important that they went out and bought out Bulldog. Like, he was on a different team. He was on LNG down in Group Nirvana, and EDG said, we're going up to Group Ascend. Let's buy out Bulldog's contract, bring him to our team, and, you know, he will be a massive upgrade over Angel. It's just an insane thought process to me. And I hate to say that I like getting proven right on this instance, but I am absolutely getting proven right by, you know, being the biggest Bulldog hater throughout the beginning part of this year, because this guy has been atrocious so far in Group Ascend. Unquestionably the worst player in Group Ascend, and probably the least valuable player so far in the LPL, just due to sheer amount of games that he has run down. He's not good in or out of lane. It's just all really bad right now for him. ZDZ struggled on the top side here. That is a massive issue because he's been one of the few players that's actually been okay for EDG. Leave doesn't have a terrible KDA, but as always, he makes an absolutely terrible play that ends up really costing him in a crucial moment, and Perukia is the worst support in Group Ascend. There's just nothing that someone like Jeje can come in here and do and like salvage this team. EDG is terrible. They're the worst team in Group Ascend, and it's not close. For Top Esports on the other side, this is a win that they kind of needed to dominate. Like, it's not just one of those, like, oh, you wanted to get a win here, 2-1 would have been okay, 2-1 would have not been okay. EDG has only won 1 game throughout the split up until this point. Top Esports needed to show that they could come out and dominate a team like EDG and get their aggressive ways back, and I think, luckily for all of us LPL fans, they absolutely did show that here. Then moving on now to day number 2 and the start of our super days for the rest of the week. We've got basically every single day at this point is a 3-series day, and so we've got a lot to cover throughout the rest of this week. Let's kick it off with arguably, unironically, the most important game of the entire week in terms of, you know, standing output. It was LGD Gaming taking on ThunderTalk Gaming, and ThunderTalk is going to pick up the 2-1 series win. They drop game number 1. It's a real team effort from LGD just in general to get that game 1 win, but they're not able to hold on to it in games 2 and 3. Junhao and Haru completely run the map and really pop off in some really important moments for ThunderTalk, get themselves a massive victory and get themselves into a really good spot in Group Ascend. I did say here that I think this is arguably the most important series of the week from just a pure output perspective, because ultimately these two teams are probably going to determine who gets that number 6 spot going into the playoffs. Bottom 2 teams, remember, in Group Ascend have to play the top 2 teams from Group Nirvana in a play-in stage to make playoffs, and top 6 are auto-seeded into playoffs. One of these two teams is going to be in that top 6 unless Edward Gaming just makes some sort of miraculous recovery in the second half. That's probably not going to happen, but ThunderTalk being able to pick up a win here and getting a small lead on LGD going into the second half, that puts them in a great spot. I mean, if they get another, you know, random major upset, now all of a sudden you're looking at ThunderTalk as a team that is basically guaranteed to be in playoffs and doesn't have to worry about the play-in stage. The reason I think that that's so important is because there are 2 teams down in Group Nirvana right now that both look pretty fantastic. We're going to talk about them in the series right right after this. But for Thunder Talk, a lot going right in this series and a lot of good to talk about in games 2 and 3. Junhao, for me, is going to get player of the series. The Pantheon and the Skarner were just completely untouchable games. He ran the map throughout this entire series. Haru deserves a lot of credit, and this is unquestionably the best run he has been on since he's been in the LPL. I don't think he was very good in Split 1 or Split 2, and so to see him actually be valuable in Split 3, I think is, really important, but I would be giving it to Haru based purely off of the pentakill, and then obviously based purely off of the KDA and the fact that he has improved, rather than the fact that I think Junhao was the most important player on the Rift for Thunder Talk. He completely ran the macro of this entire series, and even in game number 1, I thought he was more than fine. Game number 2, game number 3, that Pantheon-Skarner duo, that was incredible. I mean, he completely took over this series on those two champions. The Pantheon game was especially devastating in game number 2. They just could not avoid him. He was everywhere on the map, completely obliterating the front line and backline, I guess, of LGD in a lot of instances when it came to that Aatrox or Leona, and then obviously just avoiding them entirely and getting onto the Varus. The Skarner that's how you play a tank, man. Like, I'm really happy to see that people have really come around on Skarner and have clearly put a lot of time and effort into figuring out how to use him to his fullest effect, because he is a true engaged champion if you can position correctly. He doesn't have the most amount of tools in comparison to like a Pantheon or a Vi or, even a Xinjiao or something like that to be able to be that frontline engager, but he can be more effective in that role because of his innate ability to stay alive in some of these exchanges. So playing him super aggro like Junhao did in this series, I think was really cool. Just an awesome split so far from a player that I had my doubts on going into this year. I had my doubts on coming out of split number 2 and split number 1. I didn't really believe in the hype surrounding Junhao. I think he is convincing me that that leap has been made and that he could be the breakout jungler of the summer split here. Like I said, Haru was also great, picked up a pentakill on lock in game number 3. That's really cool. We're going to talk about Tung Yuan in just a second. I think he has really started to fall off in terms of his performances in the past couple of series. He's been fine, but he's like going down 20 CS in lane and then just kind of being invisible throughout a lot of the rest of these games. His game 1 was very good on the Casio, but the Ahri, the Syndra, kind of invisible, and Haru was much more active on the map. I think specifically on that lock in game number 3, definitely deserved the shout out that he got. I think he was player of the game just because Junhao was so important on the Skarner, but certainly the lock game was very good. Rest of the team, not as good. I think Feather had some really nice moments, especially on the Shen in game number 2. I think that was one of the most impressive games he's played in quite a while, but on kind of sucked in this series, and that is a big problem. Thunder Talk need their bot lane to step up. For as much as I'm praising Junhao, they're not going to actually be a team that can be a contender unless their bot lane starts playing like they did in split number 2. Now, the good thing is that we've seen them play well together before. It's just a very different meta now. Feather getting out on the map and roaming around and being, this big playmaker, that's not really his style. I think On also kind of liked being the main character like he was in split 2, and now he has to play more weak side. I don't think it's an ideal situation for both On and Feather, but I think they're trying to make the best out of it. In this case, I don't think On was very good. That Ziggs game in game 1 was disgustingly terrible, but they at least weren't bad enough to cost their team the series. Feather actively was good down the stretch, again, especially on that Shen. Keshi also was unquestionably the weaker top laner. I still think Keshi is very overrated as a player. I think people see the potential in him as a player. They see the highlight moments, and the game-to-game consistency is still just not there. Bertle was better than him in this series, in my opinion. He didn't make a ton of egregious errors. He just didn't have the same kind of pressure that someone like Bertle did on the top side, but ultimately, if your jungle mid is better, you're going to win the series, and that was the case here for Thunder Talk. For LGD on the other side, a lot of positives, man. Bertle was good. I thought Xiaoya was okay. Tung Yuan didn't make a ton of mistakes. Hung had a really good game number 1 on the Nefiri, but once again continued to struggle off of that champion. He's kind of been a bit of a Nefiri one-trick over the course of this split, which is funny considering he's going into Junhao, the player who basically introduced Nefiri jungle into the meta last year. Pretty cool to see that, but I do have to give a dud of the series, and for me, it is going to go to Crisp. This honestly feels a bit unjustified. He was pretty good in game 1 on the Nautilus. Probably not player of the game worthy, but certainly was okay enough, and a lot of the engages he went for were fine. It's the Leona game that he's mostly getting this dud of the series for. The Leona game was not good. In game number 2, I thought he was in the wrong places at the wrong times. His roams were not particularly efficient, and I don't think he made the most of that champion's kit when you're going into someone like Shen, Pantheon, Ryze, like all of this big macro threat on the other side. You have to be active on the map, and I just don't think Crisp was active enough. The Camille game was okay, but it wasn't like good. It just was fine enough, and everybody else on the team I think had a lot of positives here. Xiaoya was actively okay throughout a majority of this series. I would even make the argument he was better than On, especially in game number 1, where they were really able to take advantage of that Ziggs. I would say the Draven game in game number 3 was fine. Like, he knows how to play the champ. Again, Tung Yuan wasn't the better mid laner, but he was at least not losing the game. Hung had a good game, and Bertle was arguably the better top laner. There's just no other option, in my opinion, for Dead of the Series. I think LGD have kind of established their reputation, unfortunately, at this point. This is a team that is going to be very close. They're going to bring a lot of teams to game number 3, but they just don't really have the firepower to be able to overcome even teams like Thunder Talk that are not exactly world beaters, but are clearly better than LGD. And this is an important loss. Again, you do not want to be one of the teams that goes down into the play-in stage. Depending on who wins this next series that we're going to talk about in this video down in Group Nirvana, like, you could have to play an Invictus or a Ninjas in Pyjamas to even try and make the playoffs to keep your year alive. That's not a position you want to be in if you're LGD, because you're not going to be favored against either of those teams, in my opinion. So not an ideal, loss for LGD, but a fantastic win for Thunder Talk, one that they absolutely needed to pick up, and they did so. The middle of their map was really good, and Junhao in particular is really proving himself to be a true leader on this team. Then moving on to our second series of day number 2, and we go down to Group Nirvana for probably the most important Group Nirvana matchup. It was Invictus Gaming taking on Ninjas in Pyjamas, and NIP are going to pick up the 2-1 series win, and they're going to take sole possession of first place down in Group Nirvana. This is a massive, massive result for Ninjas in Pyjamas, because this is a team that I've generally not been considering a world's threat, really throughout all of the split up until this point. I thought that the change on the bot side was both good and bad. Bringing Feng Yue in, I think, is obviously really good for NIP. That is a, big addition. He is a really great player, and Top Esports never should have given up on him in the first place, but losing Awesome for Photic just felt like such a downgrade that I didn't really believe that this team was going to be able to live up to the standard they set for themselves in the previous split by being the number 5 seed going into the play-ins, and obviously underperforming there, but everybody underperformed there. I thought Invictus, with their upgraded roster, bringing obviously the Shy and Rookie back, but more important to me, bringing Awesome in as their starting ADC was going to be that thing that really pushed them over the top, considering how good Awesome was in the previous split for Ninjas in Pyjamas. But as we looked at this series, what became abundantly clear as we watched is that no, it's actually the complete opposite. NIP is still better than Invictus, just like they were in the previous split, and a lot of the players that we thought were maybe going to regress going into this split because they didn't have like star players around them, they've absolutely stepped up and been able to dominate, most notably Care in the mid lane. He's the obvious choice for player of the series here. There's not even really all that much of a debate. The Cassio and the Silas, both in games 2 and 3, were just utterly dominant. He completely gapped not only Rookie, but everybody on the side of Invictus, just finding his way into the backline of teamfights as that Silas in game 3, finding good pick angles alongside the Skarner to capitalize on some really nice engages, and then the Cassio just playing straight up front to back and being the big damage dealer alongside the Xayah, wanting to play these, pretty standard 5v5 teamfights. Like, you're really good at going backwards as this comp. The Olaf creates a lot of space, and so does Trundle on the front line, and Cassio can take advantage of that really effectively. Care has been on fire so far this split. I would go as far as to say this reminds me of like 2023 Care, when I was really hyping this guy up as one of the more interesting young mid laners in the LPL when he was really first coming through on Fun Plus Phoenix. This is the kind of quality that he has been playing with so far in 2026. I never really thought we were going to get that version of him back, because 2024, 2025, they were fine years. Like, he wasn't a disaster, but he was just like that stock standard average to slightly below average mid laner at this level. Did kind of feel like he slotted into that role relatively easily, where he just never was going to be able to break games in that same kind of way. Well, here we are. He's been excellent so far in Group Nirvana, almost certainly the best player in this entire group up until this point, and he is more than deserving of the player of the series in this particular one. I do got to give a lot of credit to bot lane, though. One of the big reasons why I was so low on NIP, I was like, man, how many opportunities can Photic possibly get as a starter? It's funny because they get rid of Zhuo and then immediately bring back Photic, and I'm like, NIP is just obsessed with these two players, cycling them in and out and never finding any success with them. Well, I guess I have egg on my face, and I guess literally everybody else in the community also has egg on their face. Don't pretend like you expected Photic to come out here and gap Awesome in this series, but that's exactly what he did. Feng Yue really is that dude in terms of what he is in the support position. He is one of the best supports in the LPL, like certainly top 3 in my opinion, if not, top 2 in terms of the way he's able to play at times, especially going up against someone like Mako and just kind of gapping him like he did in this series. Feng Yue is everything we were hyping him up to be, and Top Esports was really stupid to get rid of him. And Photic is the one who gets to benefit from that. This guy's been popping off so far over the course of this, but the only negative I have is that they've got a very small sample size. This is only their 3rd series playing together, but boy, has it looked good in all 3 of those series for both of these players. Hoya has continued his really good run of form. The Shy has kind of been an MVP merchant so far down in Group Nirvana. This is definitely a bit of a, a frustrating loss for IG. They probably wanted to be better on the top side, and they didn't really get that. And Guan, very aggressive, very much a setup player. His KDAs aren't always going to look so good, but he does have a pretty big impact on the game. This This is a big win for the Ninjas in Pyjamas. It really does establish them as the best team in Group Nirvana, and quite frankly, with the way that things are going up in Group Ascend, that means that they could theoretically be a threat to make the World Championships, which is something that we were talking about in the previous split. That's very much carried over. And for Invictus on the other side, this is a disappointing result. I mean, game 1 was obviously pretty good, and it's not like you got blown out. Game 3 was competitive, but you were, the team that threw away the position that you were in. Like, we have to talk about it. IG should have won game number 3. I didn't really mention it for NIP because Care was so good in that game on the Silas, and Photic, I think, stepped up really heavily on the Sivir at the end of that game as well. But IG had full control over game number 3 with Wukong and Victor and Jax and all of these, even Ezreal, right? Like, all of these champions that have the ability to take over in the back end of the game, and they just did nothing with them. They completely misplayed. They got destroyed in the team fights that really mattered, and their star players just kind of faded into the background. It was a really poor performance from a team that really needed to win this. Now, I'm not willing to completely get rid of any IG hype off of this series because they probably should have won it with the way that game 3 was set up. They just weren't able to close it out. That being said, you have to talk about why they threw. To me, the positioning of Awesome down the stretch of this series was simply just not good enough. First off, he had the worst game of this series in game number 2. It wasn't even remotely close. That Lucian game was terrible from him. He got completely destroyed by this Cassio in most team fights, just trying to play on the edge of danger. And when you're going up against Trundle and Olaf as a Lucian, you have to be so careful about the amount of times that you use your dash to set up more combo damage and things like that. Like, you need to be really intentional about how you position throughout a lot of the game. And he just wasn't that in this particular one. That Lucian performance was bad, and his Ezreal was really anti-clutch at the end of game number 3. It was really important for Awesome to come in here and be an upgrade to Jiachi, and I thought it was going to be really easy for him to do that, considering how good he was in the previous split and how bad Jiachi was for this team. One of the biggest reasons why they were down in Group Nirvana, but him being dead of the series is a really bad sign for IG in the sense that if he's not going to be able to step up and be somebody that can carry them above an NIP caliber team, then I don't know if IG can make the World Championships. He is a critical piece of whether or not they're going to be successful. The rest of the roster had good moments and bad moments. The Shy was generally not great in this series. He had some big moments, especially in game 1 on the Rumble, but overall, I think the consistency wasn't really there, and Hoya was almost certainly the better top laner when it really mattered down the stretch here. Wei was excellent on the Neferi in game number 1. Generally had decent tempo on the Nocturne and the Wukong, but his team fighting wasn't super consistent, which is the opposite of what we know from Wei. Rookie was the weaker mid laner, but I do think he was probably the best player on Invictus in this series, which is not great. Again, you want to be the better, you want to be the best player in that role in Group Nirvana. I don't think that it's crazy to say that Rookie should be better than Care if he wants to be the player that we think he can be. Him being okay in this series, but Care having a bigger impact on who won, that is a bit of a problem. Mako, I think, also wasn't particularly dominant or anything like that. Feng Yue was the better support, and I think he is the better support right now in terms of a player. Invictus still have a lot of good things going for them, but it's clear we just underestimated Ninjas in Pyjamas. This is a top 5-ish team in the LPL right now in terms of the way they're able to play. Maybe top 6 if you really just want to say that nobody in Group Nirvana is a Worlds caliber team, but if anybody right now is that Worlds threat coming out of Group Nirvana that's going to be building all of that confidence before they go into playoffs, it's going to be the Ninjas in Pyjamas, because clearly this is a team that you have to take seriously. Then moving on to our third and final series of day number 2, and we get a pretty big upset here to close out the day. It was Team WE taking on Anyone's Legend, and Team WE pick up yet another consequential and really important victory for themselves as they do the impossible. They find a way to lose in kills in both game 1 and game 2 to go down almost 9,000 gold in this game, especially that game number 2, and still find a way to be able to come back and win 2-0 and knock AL off their perch. This team was white hot. AL was coming into this series. They had been incredibly dominant throughout all of week 2. Their only loss up until this point in this split was against Bilibili Gaming, who is the best team in the league, and obviously, is a team that everybody expects to continue to maybe push for an undefeated split or at least be, the clear number 1 team. And so nobody was really judging AL all that much. This team looked fantastic, the best that they had looked all year long in terms of their consistency, only for them to come out here and lose all of that momentum by dropping this series somehow. I'm going to talk about why I'm not all that worried for AL moving forward, because these are just strange games in general. You can argue that maybe they made too many mistakes in order to be like a team you feel good about being at number 2, but the reality for me is more so the fact that I think AL got massive leads in both of these games, and if they were just, a normal team, they would have closed this out, and WE kind of got lucky to have a chance to be able to get back, but they took advantage of that luck. They found their opportunity to get back in, and they absolutely executed on it. So let's talk about it. Cube kind of has to be player of the series. There's really not a lot else I can even, consider. Karis was obviously great and really important in terms of the damage he was able to output. Even players like Monkey and Arha, I think, had moments where they were able to create for the rest of the team, but Cube, this guy single-handedly won them the game by just existing. In game number 1, it's the Dr. Mundo, who they just never really had an answer for. That game was much more even, and WE being able to win it was much more just about better late-game execution. But in game number 2, you're looking at this comp. It's a Renekton Nidalee topside. You have Corki in the mid lane, double marksman here for Karus and About, and AL does a great job of basically just saying, well, About's not going to get to play the game. We're picking Xerath Camille. We're constantly going to be diving this Varus. We have so much backline access that it's nearly impossible for Varus to play. We got massive leads in our major side lanes because of the way that AL was able to play in the early game. Tarzan did a great job of opening up the map for both Breathe and Shanks after Breathe had a fantastic game number 1 in the Olaf that he just couldn't really secure because he was running into, again, a Dr. Mundo at the end of that game. But the big problem came at 9k gold when you go for Baron and all of a sudden, things start to fall apart. One team fight later and all of a sudden WE's back in the game, and then Breathe makes a catastrophic mistake, which I'm going to talk about, Gnar ulting the Renekton immediately on top of his fed Xerath and instantly killing Hope and losing the entire series because of it. It obviously is something that you don't want to see happen if you're an AL fan or if you're AL in general, but you got to give WE credit. In both of those situations, it was the Mundo in game 1 and it was the Renekton getting ulted onto Xerath and being able to blow him up in game number 2 that really made the big difference. And that means that Cube is the most important player in this series. Now, do I think it was entirely Cube's doing that it got this way? Maybe not, right? He kind of got lucky in game number 2 to have that advantage, and Dr. Mundo in general just had no clear answer in the game 1 draft. And so, did Cube's gameplay really separate him? Not so much, but Cube's existence, his presence, was enough of a difference maker, and I think that that is worthy of a player of the series moniker. Now, to be fair, it's hard to really praise WE because they were in such terrible positions throughout a lot of the early games, specifically in game number 2. So I am going to be a bit more negative about the rest of the team. Karus, I think, was generally fine in this series. He's been more than capable at surviving in the 1v1s in the mid lane, which I think is important. But somebody like About, man, he was just targeted so much by AL. I'm not even really blaming him, but he was basically taken out of all of these games just based off the pressure that AL was willing to put into him and the ability to force him to be on the back foot throughout a lot of the games. And then Arha, I don't think made the most aggressive plays, we'll just say at the beginning here. I think if you're going to play something like Renekton Nidalee, this Nautilus needs to be super active and roaming towards the middle of the map, and I don't think Arha was as good at that as Kyle was on the other side. All of that to say that Monkey is actually going to be my dud of the series in the jungle here. I know you can probably justify the Nidalee game, being good enough to not be dud of the series. He had some moments in the back end there, specifically at some of those major objectives. The Nidalee wasn't exactly useless in those team fights. She was outputting damage, and of course the heals were relevant in the back end of that game as well, but that Pantheon game did not deserve a win. There is no justification for him being able to win game number 1 the way he played it. It was literally just the team completely bailing him out. And unfortunately, I do believe he had unquestionably the worst game of anybody in this entire series that he still was able to pick up a win in. So despite the fact that they don't even drop a game, which is something I did try to take into account when picking my dud of the series, Monkey was the worst player on the Rift for me in that game number 1, and I don't think anybody else was nearly bad enough in game number 2 to justify getting it over Monkey. So he's going to get my dud of the series. Again, I think there was value towards how Monkey played. I just don't think anyone on AL could be given that dud of the series, and that's because for the most part, they were the better team here by a pretty large margin. They got massive leads in really both games, but especially in game number 2, and the fact that they weren't able to hang on to it is obviously incredibly frustrating, but the reality is that that's kind of a very fluky thing. If you're trying to evaluate a team and you're looking at them throwing a big lead in a series, well, that's just not really super repeatable. It's obviously a bit of a concern that they weren't able to hold on to the lead, that they played so poorly, that they made a couple of big mental mistakes in the back end of game number 2. But AL is not really a team that I think of being bad team fighters. In fact, they've been really good team fighters throughout this split up until this point. So I am kind of just treating this like a little bit of a detour in the AL story where they obviously didn't want to lose 2-0 here, but I'm not going to punish them super hard. Nobody gets dud of the series on this team because everybody kind of did their job. I think the only person I considered was Breathe. He was so good in game number 1 that it was almost unjustifiable, but he did have the game-losing play in game number 2 with that Gnar ultimate on top of his Xerath, but Hope was super fed, even though he was the one who died and kind of cost them the game. It wasn't really his fault that he died, and him dying and losing the game was because he was really strong and had a good early game. Tarzan was really proactive and got his team a big lead. Shanks was more than fine in terms of the lead he was able to get, although I don't think it was the best series he's ever played. Kyle had some problems on the Shen and the Camille, but overall, I would say that a lot of the problems came from him being overly aggressive, which I would rather see. He was much more active on the map than someone like Arha was on the other side. So I don't think anybody deserved it for AL. There is no dud of the series candidate here. I'm frustrated that they lost both of these games, but in reality, like, if you played both of these games back out right now, do I think AL loses both of them? No, I think there's actually a pretty good chance that they win both of these games, so long as they're not just completely broken as a team. It just kind of fell this way on the day, and that makes it kind of hard to analyze it. I'm not really all that much lower on AL. I'm happy that WE were able to win here, but they kind of got lucky. This is a series I'm probably not going to take too much away from because there were just so many variables that I don't think are all that repeatable between these two teams. Then moving on now to day number 3, our middle day of the week, and it kicked off with a matchup between JD Gaming and Edward Gaming. That went exactly how you think it would. It was JDG 2-0, and it was not particularly close. 2 big blowout games, and not really a ton to talk about here. Probably going to be a bit of a quicker recap because really, what do I even discuss when it comes to this series and these two teams? It just was very JDG favored with the way that they broke it down, and this is a good sign. JDG needed to step up and really prove that they were a team that, could dominate the lower tier teams in Group Ascend. They're kind of running through the gauntlet now of a bunch of teams that they should be beating, like LGD, like EDG, and you've got WE later on in the week. If you can walk out of here, undefeated in week number 3, that is a much better sign about JDG potentially making Worlds than what we got at the beginning of the split. For EDG, at this point, I'll take a game. Like, they won 1 game so far this split, and we're halfway through the split. Like, we're actually at the midway point for them. It's just been ridiculous. This team is by far the worst team in Group Ascend, and honestly, they're making a pretty good argument for being the worst team in the LPL right now. Again, if LNG didn't exist, then this would be a very easy conversation, but I think EDG are bailed out in a couple of ways in that regard. So let's talk about it here. Just not really a ton to discuss. Junja is going to get player of the series for me. Gala gets multiple pentakills, I believe, in this series. I know he got 1. I believe he got 2. I didn't write it in my notes, but if I remember correctly, he got multiple pentakills here, and it just was ridiculous. And so if you want to give it to Gala, I understand. If you want to give him player of the series, I totally get where you're coming from. I think he was well set up, and I think he capitalized well on the setup that happened. But to me, Junja was the reason that Gala was in the position to be able to pick up those pentakills, and I thought he was excellent in the early game. Also, the narrative of this series was Junja versus Jeje, 2 former teammates going head-to-head, obviously, on EDG. Junja going against that former org that he was under Jeje and kind of swapping out time with Jeje in with Edward Gaming on the other side. So I'm sure he was going to be happy to completely gap his former mentor and be able to just pick up a massive win here. He's not been very good, I'll be honest, at the start of this split. Like I said before, Junja and Gala to me have been the weak links of JDG so far in the summer split, but seeing them both get back on track this week, Gala having some really great performances across both of the series they played, and Junja obviously omega gapping Jeje on the other side, that is a really good sign. I'm just hopeful that it's going to be able to continue. Obviously, they played the 2 worst teams in Group Ascend, and so it's all well and good for them to be able to do it against these teams, but you need to be able to do it against, at least the teams that are around you, like a WE or like a Top Esports or an AL, like at least be able to survive in matchups like that, and that still remains to be determined, but it looked pretty good here, being able to control the entire map, really setting everything up. The Trundle game in particular was disgustingly good from Junja, and I'm just hopeful that we're getting that version of him, because he was my first team All-Pro jungler in this spring split. He's just not carried that at all through into summer so far. Like I said, Gala was really good. Hongq continues to be better than pretty much everybody that he's playing into. I think the only exception to that has been that series against Knight. And you know what? Everybody gets gapped by Knight, so like, what are we even worried about here? Like, of course, Hongq wasn't the better mid laner. Nobody is the better mid laner against that guy. And so, Bulldog is obviously a bit of a different story in terms of, what we're expecting. And he didn't break the game or take over in the same kind of way that maybe you would hope against the worst player in the LPL right now in Bulldog, but he was still more than fine. Vampire, I think, found some of his form on these engagers and these roamers. Xiaoshu, I think, was at least stable, although once again, ZDZ was more than fine on the top side. That was the one part of the map that was not ideal for JDG. Xiaoshu has just not looked comfortable at all so far this split. There are still problems for JDG, but they certainly didn't run into any of them in this series in particular. And then for EDG on the other side, like, what do I even discuss? Like, Jeje has not really been an upgrade to this team. In fact, he's been basically identical to what Xiaohao was. His early games are fine. They're not good, but they're not bad. And then everything just completely falls apart in the mid to late game because mid lane is getting completely rolled and the bot lane is like losing every bit of an advantage that they could possibly generate for themselves. Perukia has no idea what he's doing on the map. Like, it's just a tough situation in general right now for EDG. Leave for me is going to be the obvious choice, I think, for dead of the series. That Lucian game was disgusting in game number 1. I mean, you give Leave a champion with a dash and he will kill himself in the most pivotal moment of the entire game. That has been LPL scripture for a long time at this point, but, seeing Leave and Jeje back on a team together and Leave completely running it down, I would love to say it's a coincidence, but who knows, man? You never really know considering the history between these two players. Leave has just not been very good. Feels like the mental on this team is destroyed, and Leave is a very confidence-based player, and so him performing poorly on a team that is performing poorly, not particularly surprising. Bulldog Frog is not good. He continued to look not very good. He was arguably the worst player in game 2, although Jeje very much came for that award on the Nefiri. Both the mid-jungle duo just not looking even remotely competent compared to their, opposition. I think this is unironically one of Perukia's best series of the split, and that just goes to show how bad Perukia has been. Not really salvageable right now in terms of the way this map is playing. I'm not entirely putting it on him, but he is a big part of why their macro is so bad. And ZDZ continues to somehow be the best player on Edward Gaming, despite the fact that ZDZ is a complete, average to below average top laner. There's just not really a lot of good to talk about when it comes to his game, but at least he's surviving in lane, and that's more than I can say for literally anyone else on this team. So, for EDG, it's a disaster. It doesn't look like it's ever going to get better. And for JDG, they've at least gotten themselves back in the win column from a record perspective, but now it really comes down to okay, well, you can do it against the bad teams. Can you do it against the good teams? I have a lot of faith that they're going to be able to do that, but now it's a wait and see approach as they've done what they're supposed to do at the beginning of the week. Then moving on now to our second series of day number 3, and I got to cast this one, and it sure was a banger, so, maybe I'll go long on it, maybe I won't, I have no clue just yet. It was Team WE taking on Thunder Talk Gaming, and Thunder Talk Gaming pull off an absolutely massive upset for themselves by picking up the 2-1 series win. They really take advantage of a WE team that just completely lost control over what they wanted to be in this series, and quite frankly, Thunder Talk completely outplayed them. This was a really fun one to get to cast live because I got to share a lot of my opinions. I think this was one of my better casts of the year up until this point. I think I did a pretty good job of maybe expressing the way that I felt about this series in real time, and generally I would say that a lot of the comments I made on that broadcast very much still stand the test of time in terms of the overall thoughts on this series, so I won't go too in-depth on it. Obviously, I'll give the cliff notes here, but again, go watch that VOD if you are interested in maybe my full concrete thoughts on, what WE did wrong and why they were in this spot. To talk about it pretty quickly, what the hell is this draft in game number 3? It's one of the worst drafts I've seen all year long from basically any tier 1 team, not only the Graves, which is nightmarish in this meta. I understand if you draft an AP carry on the bottom side and you don't have an AD carry in the mid lane, you maybe want to go for a marksman of sorts, a scaling AD carry in the jungle. The problem is you can't really afford to go scaling in the jungle right now. A lot of the AD carries that are really effective are Nocturne or Nefiri or Qiyana, these champions that have a ton of combat power in the mid game because you need to be able to fight over these objectives with the way that objectives have really scaled. I mean, they're incredibly strong right now. You just can't be Graves and, wait until 3 items to try and fight people as a jungler. It becomes really difficult to play the game out in that regard. And obviously when Monkey is going for level 1 invades all 3 games in a row and he gets spotted in game number 3 and gives over the entire game, that's going to be a bit of a problem as well. To be fair to Thunder Talk, their mid-jungle duo continues to look fantastic, and I think they really stepped up here today. Haru, for me, is going to get my player of the series over Junhao, although I think it could go to either of those two. Both were absolutely better than their counterparts. I think I'm just more surprised by Haru being so good right now because he was so bad throughout a majority of the year. I was ready to give up on both him and Keshi, and Keshi himself had some negative moments in this series. I would say Cube was unironically the better top laner between these two. Cube is actually kind of on fire right now in terms of the way he's played over the last couple of games, but Haru was awesome in the mid lane. He had massive gold leads in basically all 3 games. The Ahri was huge in game number 1, absolutely dominated the back end of that game with the gold lead he had generated, and the Annie was the only champion that was consistently dominating their own individual laning phase, and I thought he used that pressure really well in team fights. Haru has completely turned a new leaf. We always knew he was a very mechanically talented player, but to see him come out and look so good in terms of the team fight stage of the game and actually start to figure out where he needs to be both in the mid game and from a macro perspective in side lanes in the later part of these games, that is the development that we needed to see. It's why you take a chance on players of this archetype, because most of the time, you can coach a player to know what to do in a side lane. You can't really coach great mechanics. Haru has always had great mechanics, and he just needed to put the other pieces together. He has finally been able to do that. Karus has been really good for WE on the other side, and he was just straight up better than him in this series. Junhao was obviously better than Monkey in basically every way outside of, I guess, parts of game number 2 where Monkey was kind of valuable on the Nocturne, although I would still say Junhao was probably better than Monkey in game number 2 as well. Just a massive jungle gap, and Junhao has been on fire. He has really cemented himself as a worthy Group Ascend caliber jungler. On and Feather were much better in this series. Arha made a ridiculous amount of mistakes in the support position. I thought On and Feather did a great job capitalizing on that. That's really important because I talked earlier about how they've kind of low-key been the weak link of this team throughout this split, and they were the most important part of this team in getting into Group Ascend in the previous split. They needed to step back up, and I think they did here. And Keshi, he was fine. He certainly wasn't the better top laner, but he didn't really need to be in this series. He just needed to survive. Mid-jungle is the most important part of the map, and that looks to be a strength right now for Thunder Talk. And if that's going to continue to be the case, I gotta stress, this this win for against a WE team, like this could very well be the win that just solidifies them for top 6, for playoffs, because this is the kind of win that a team like LGD is not really going to be able to catch up on, even if they're able to beat ThunderTalk the second time around later on in this split. For WE, not a great loss. I mean, you're already in an okay spot from a record perspective, but it's not really about the record. It's more so about the momentum, I think, that WE probably loses in this series. Like, the Graves pick is just completely unacceptable. The draft in general in Game 3 is completely unacceptable. You're entirely in on scaling, but you have something like a Camille on the bot side that wants to skirmish a lot in the early game. You don't have any way to play aggressive, and WE really are only good in the early game in terms of their ability to stay consistent. They're not exactly the most consistent team fighting team, despite what their series against AL would have taught you. Monkey is the obvious choice for dud of the series. He was awful, like truly horrible here today. This is the second one he's gotten this week, and they haven't even lost 2 series. Monkey is just not in good form right now. This team has been held afloat by, I think, the fact that the rest of the team has been okay. Cube was obviously really good throughout this week so far, and I think players like Karis and About and Arha have been all right, although Arha was also terrible in this series, but Monkey is really not in form, and I think that is a bit of a problem. We saw before playoffs, obviously, in the previous split when this team was by far the worst team in Group Ascend, that they weren't really able to hang because Monkey wasn't good enough to compete with the other junglers. They were able to make their way back and be good at the beginning of the regular season. This split, because Monkey was back in form, if he's going to be picking things like Graves and getting run over, he's going to continue to be not an asset to WE, and this team is going to get worse. He is the entirety of this team, and when he plays as bad as this, they have no chance of winning. Karis wasn't good enough here today. Arha was awful going up against Feather. This is his worst series of the split by a pretty large margin. About has been almost entirely irrelevant, although I would say On was definitely the better AD carry. Cube was unironically elo held in this series, and that was kind of the case in the previous one against AL in that same vein. Crazy that I have to defend Cube of all people, but just kind of the reality that we've come upon. WE with a loss they probably shouldn't have had. I guess this makes up for the fact that they randomly won a series against AL. They walked out of their 2 series against AL and ThunderTalk 1-1, just as we all expected, just maybe not in the way that we thought they were going to get there. And this is a huge win for ThunderTalk. Remember, this is a win that, maybe an LGD can't get. And if, ThunderTalk are winning series that LGD aren't going to be able to answer, well, that basically cements you as a top 6 team in terms of record, even if you go and lose to LGD. That's all ThunderTalk want to do is make the playoffs, guarantee themselves a spot there. And remember, if they make the playoffs out of Group Ascend, they start in the upper bracket rather than the lower bracket, no matter what. Avoiding play-ins is incredibly important for ThunderTalk, and this might have been the win that really solidifies that for them. But that's going to bring us to our final series of day number 3, and this was a pretty good one. Arguably the series of the week here in the LPL. It was Bilibili Gaming taking on Top Esports, and Top Esports are not only going to pick up a 2-0 win here, but they're going to do it in dominant fashion. Game 2 was entirely TES favored, and they were the better team by a large margin in this one. Basically, everybody on Top Esports outplayed their counterpart on the other side. Maybe there's one exception to that, but I think even then, you're probably being a little too generous to Shillin if you think that he was better than Tien. Tien maybe was a little bit fraudulent in this series, as we're going to talk about, but Zwayon, Cream, Jackie Love, Zhuo, all of them stepped up for Top Esports and really showcased that they can be better than BLG. For BLG, this is an unfortunate loss. Like, honestly, I don't really worry about this team. Like, they're probably going to be number 1 in my power rankings, unless they just randomly lose multiple other series, right? Mostly because, as we know now, and we're going to talk about it here, Flandra is obviously now officially signed for Bilibili Gaming coming into week number 4. He is going to be starting on the top side, and I think things do go a little bit differently if you have Flandra on the top side, but there were more problems than just Weibo in this series. In fact, Weibo was far from the problem on BLG's. Zwayon obviously got Omega fed, but it wasn't really Weibo's fault. It was that they never really had an answer in game number 2. And game number 1 was also unbelievable from him on the Rumble as well. Easiest possible choice I could get for player of the series. It is very clearly Zwayon that's going to be getting this award. I'm shocked the broadcast gave it to Jackie Love. I think that has to be a KDA thing because Zwayon was better. Like, he was the best player on the Rift, and it was not close. He was unbelievable in this series. And it's funny because we were talking about this as an LPL English crew at the story meeting that we had today, and I guess I can, talk about this a little bit. It really is kind of staggering that when you look at the top lane pool right now in the LPL, you're like, man, Zwayon is like by far the number 1 top laner in the LPL. It's just crazy to say that because, we would have expected that would not have been the case at the start of the year. Somebody who had never played in the LPL before and had been an emergency sub in the spring split for 369, but he is the best top laner in the league right now. There is nobody that's even close in terms of the results and the production that he has been capable of putting up over the past couple of weeks. I mean, There's no 369, there's no Bin, there's no Flandra. Xiaoshu is underperformed. Breathe, I don't really think has been, good enough to take that crown. Who else is even in the running? Cube? Like what else are we even talking about? ZDZ? Like, what other player is even in the contest? The Shy? He's in Group Nirvana. Like, it's just so hard to sit here and be like, Zweon's not the best top laner in the league. There's no competition for this award, and he tore up BLG in this series. The Rumble game was unstoppable in game 1. The Equalizers legitimately won them that game in terms of the damage he was able to output, and then I cannot for the life of me understand why he did not get player of the game for game number 2. That Olaf was completely unkillable. The fact they gave it to Jackie Love is fine. Jackie Love played great in this series. Both Jackie Love and Zhuo, I think, were excellent and took advantage of Viper, especially in the early game when he was on that immobile carry in the Varus. But Zweon was the main character of this series, and I don't think there's going to be a lot of people that are really going to be arguing that, so more than deserved player of the series nod for Zweon. Like I said, Jackie Love and Zhuo were also excellent for top esports here. They just completely outplayed Viper and On. Viper was okay in game 1 on the Corki. I think that was definitely what, saved him from a dead of the series nod, but he was targeted. I mean, on this immobile carry in game number 2, you have to be able to protect the Varus, and, Cream, Tien, Zhuo, even in terms of the ultimates, he was constantly finding good angles onto Viper to take advantage of him both early and in the late game team fights, and Jackie Love was the beneficiary, not the benefactor, the beneficiary of that in the AD carry role here. The Ashe game in particular was really good. Maybe not player of the game good, but still very good in the Jhin. Obviously very productive. This is a very difficult comp to play into if the Jhin is fed in game number 1, which was exactly the case. Zhuo just had his best series as a member of top esports. I've been very critical of this team for the support change in the midseason here, but Zhuo kind of justifying it with the way that he played in this series, really outplayed On and set his team up for a lot of success. Cream was good. Tien was, again, the only player that you could draw some negative opinions about, especially on the Vi in game number 1, where he certainly had some questionable engages, but I would rather him be overly aggressive than overly passive. I'm more than fine with Tien being the kind of player that is going to try plays rather than sit and wait for the game to catch back up to him. That's not what happened here. He was pushing the tempo, and it really benefited his laners, even if it did make him look a little bit more suspect. So overall, massive showcase for top esports and a massive, massive win for them that nobody really expected them to get. And for Bilibili on the other side, I'm going to do something that I don't even know if I've ever done on this channel. Knight's going to get dud of the series. I don't know how many of these I've ever even given to Knight since I've been doing this for 6+ years at this point, but he is going to be getting the dud of the series, and I don't really think there's a ton of argument here. The Lissandra game was bad in game number 1. He was almost entirely useless there, and I think the fact that he didn't really have any damage in the back end of the game pretty much cost them. I think Viper was too valuable in that game to justify giving dud of the series to him. I don't think the Syndra was awful in game number 2. The Varus was probably less valuable, and maybe even On or Wenbo had a worse game number 2, but Knight was also ineffective in game 2. He got, kind of pushed back in terms of the laning matchup. This is the first time that I've really been like, oh, he wasn't like significantly better than his opposition on the other side, and I think that is something that is worth noting. Knight has been so utterly dominant in the LPL for the last decade almost, maybe a little bit less than that, but certainly the last half a decade that, seeing him even just be average in a series is like, whoa, that's like a reality check, because he's never average. He's always above average with the way that he plays. It was kind of strange. I think this is unquestionably the worst series he's played. Now, it was almost, if this is the worst series that he's played and he was kind of just fine in it, that just goes to show how good he is, but he's done of the series. I think he earned that title in this one. On Wenbo, I don't think they were better. I'm not going to blame Wenbo nearly as much because, again, he's still the sub top laner here. Flandra has been signed, and he will be coming in at the start of week number 4. But On, wasn't very good. He should be better than Zhuo in terms of the roams. Viper was constantly getting taken advantage of, and Shun wasn't exactly dominating, even if he was probably the closest to his opposition on the other side in TN. BLG weren't better today. Like, they were the weaker team between them and top esports, and that is certainly interesting to consider moving forward because TES is a team we've been talking about moving down in terms of expectations because of the way they played in week number 2. I moved them to number 3 in my power rankings after that loss to Anyone's Legend. Well, this is as good of a fire back as you could possibly give. Zweon is on fire. He's the best top laner in the league right now. Jackie Love is the best AD carry in the league. And, players like Zhuo, Cream, Tien, like, they're clearly good enough to be able to hold their own. Like, obviously, we knew that about Tien and Cream, but Zhuo was really good in this series, and that was the big thing holding me back from saying top esports was a true title contender. Well, here you go. Top esports doing everything in their power to prove to people that they are as good as maybe their record would indicate. But then moving on now to day number 4 and the beginning, I guess, of the back 2 days of our weekend here in the LPL. And kicking off our penultimate day was a Group Nirvana matchup between Weibo Gaming and LNG Esports, with Weibo Gaming picking up the 2-0 victory. This was expected. LNG has been a complete disaster so far this split, and Weibo is absolutely still a team that I believe in from a talent perspective. I just think that the overall package right now is unfortunate. I mean, them being in Group Nirvana is already a pretty big problem for them, but being in Group Nirvana with Ninjas in Pyjamas and Invictus Gaming, who are both some of the best teams in the LPL. It's a very unfortunate situation for Weibo because I do think that this is a good team, as we saw in this series. I think the acquisition of Xiaohao in the jungle is not an upgrade per se because Jeje was so good at the beginning of the year, and obviously you would expect Jeje to still be a valuable piece for this team, but it's certainly like close to a side grade. Xiaohao is still very much an LPL caliber jungler. You're not losing out in terms of getting rid of Jeje. And I do think that there are other players on this team like Elk, like Xiaohu that I've gone to bat for in the past that are still very much Group Ascend caliber. The problem is that I just think the other two teams in this group are a little more Group Ascend caliber. So the fact that Xiaohu's coming in and looking so good day number one might not be able to last. It might only be an LNG kind of thing. Who knows though? Maybe Weibo can recover and actually punch their ticket to the play-in stage, which would be massive. They would have to recover quite a few spots, though. We'll talk about that a bit at the end of the week. Two new starters, I guess, for Weibo here. Of course, Xiaohao coming in because of that trade with EDG, Jeje. We've talked about plenty, but I talked about this. Xiaohao was the best player on Edward Gaming. He comes into this series. He's going to win player of the series for me. He was the most valuable player in both of these games, I think, pretty clearly. But the other new player, I think, also kind of has an argument for player of the series, that being Moham in the support position. Coming in, there's a lot of off-the-riff stuff going on. We'll just say with Weibo, it turns out this team kind of imploded over the course of last week, and it felt like, or it was talked about as if multiple of these players were not even going to come back to the team. Elk potentially being one of them, Jeje and Jue kind of being the other ones. Now Jeje is traded over to EDG, and you get a new jungler, and Jue has been benched, and as far as we know, will continue to be benched. We've heard a lot about Jue's, we'll just say, attitude problems over the course of not only this split, but his career in general. It's why he's flip-flopped around a lot of teams in the past. Moham coming in as the permanent solution now that the visa situation is, I guess, done and dusted, and that he actually is able to get into the country. And you know what? This team looked infinitely better with Xiaohao and Moham. They certainly have the talent. It was really just about making sure that the vibes weren't terrible like they were at the beginning of the split. And, we're going to talk about Moham. He was excellent in this series. Absolutely better than missing on the other side. But as I said, Xiaohao was my player of the series. The Jarvan, the Neferi, both of those games really good. Weiwei hasn't exactly been the best jungler in the entire world. I've never been a big fan of Weiwei, as longtime viewers of the channel would know, but Xiaohao is somebody that I do think is still underrated by the community. I know I'm like the one guy that continues to go to bat for him over and over again every single year. It's honestly become a bit of my reputation. And you know what? I'll take that. He's one of my favorite players in the world, but the reality is that people talk about him as if he's not a valuable jungler, and in a league of very valuable junglers, he's not the flashiest. He's certainly not like the sexiest gameplay wise in terms of his playstyle, but he is one of the most efficient junglers in the LPL, and generally I think he's really raised, I think, the ceiling and the floor of basically every single team he's played with. He's just never really been given a good opportunity in the LPL. This is once again another bad opportunity, but as we saw the last time that Xiaohao was on Weibo Gaming getting to play with players like Xiaohu, he can have an effect on this team. It's not really his fault that Tarzan came in and was a better player than him. Of course Tarzan's a better player than him, but the reality is that Xiaohao is a valuable jungler. He came in and completely gapped Weiwei, did it on both a facilitator and a carry, which I think some people forget about. He's kind of taken that more facilitator type of role in the modern era, or at least in the modern version of himself, especially, from the moment he joined Weibo onwards. But back when he was on Anyone's Legend as kind of their primary star in the early parts of his career, he was a carry-oriented jungler, somebody who was really aggressive and would generate massive leads for himself individually. He can still do that. His early game pathing has been great all year long. He's just not really had the lanes to be able to facilitate well. Now his mid laner is in a great spot. His bot lane was doing really well in this series, and now all of those early leads that he's able to get actually turn into something with the Aurora and with the Syndra and Kai'Sa in game number 2. And everything just becomes a ton easier. So credit to Xiaohao. He was excellent here. I think he's a good fit for this team. It maybe is a little too late in terms of the timing for him joining, but I do think he will inevitably kind of be an upgrade to this team, if only because the vibes with Jeje here were just so bad. Moham as well, actually kind of an upgrade, at least in terms of the way he played in this series. He looked awesome as an engager. This is a meta that actually he is probably a little more proficient at than I was giving him credit for when I really dissed him in the primer video when talking about Weibo Gaming. Moham has been pretty terrible throughout his entire career, and I'm certainly not going to big up his laning ability or his macro. I think both of those are quite bad, but you tell him to play Leona and AFK go in and engage, like, he can do that. He is a good team fight engager, and that's really his main skill set. And so when you have this meta now where he can play Shen and Leona and basically just play for skirmishes and fights all the time alongside his jungler, I think that is a meta that he can really thrive in. Just from a skill set perspective, Missing put up basically no resistance in this series to that playstyle, so Obviously, it makes it a little bit easier when your enemy support's not doing so hot, but I thought Moham was really good in this series, and I'm hopeful he's able to keep that up. Elk was really solid. You know, he actually was not very good. I think in their 2 losses against NIP and IG, those are 2 pretty good teams, but generally Elk was expected to potentially carry those games and be one of the better players on the Rift. He was actively weaker than I think a lot of the players he was playing against, most notably that series against NIP, where I thought Fodic just kind of outplayed him in terms of the bot lane matchup, and that's really not ideal. Hopefully Elk, with the better, you know, team environment, is going to be able to get back to his old ways. Xiaohu, I think, has always been a bit underrated throughout all of this year. I said it, and I'll say it again. I think he was the second best mid laner down the stretch of the regular season in spring. Everything just collapsed for Weibo in the play-in stage, and Zika is whatever on the top side. He is fine. Like, he has not really impressed me a lot throughout this year, but Weibo are not out of it by any stretch. They're sitting at 1-2, coming out of their first, I guess, run through of Group Nirvana. It's very unlikely that they're going to be able to make the play-in stage just because they did lose to IG and NIP, and depending on how things go, they're probably going to have to beat Invictus Gaming and maybe even NIP as well in order to get themselves into the play-in stage, but it technically is very much possible for them to be in that position as long as they can keep things rolling. As for LNG on the other side, they're the worst team in the league, and it's just not particularly close. This mid-jungle duo is completely unplayable. Weiwei and Ya are just absolutely terrible in the early game. Weiwei is incredibly passive, very selfish in terms of the resources he's getting, which is a problem because while Nya, I think, is more of an assassin player, somebody that should be able to, you know, win isolated from a mechanical perspective, he doesn't have the mechanics to survive at the tier 1 level. He's just not a good enough player to lane against basically any other mid laner. We knew that on Invictus last split, and we certainly know it now on LNG. Once again, the fact that Saber is not in the starting lineup for this roster makes me actually want to tear my hair out, but it's just the reality of the situation. Neither of them are going to get done of the series for me. That's going to go to Missing in the bot lane. Nightmare series for Missing. I don't want to blame him entirely because what we've seen super regularly from every single bottom tier team in almost every region throughout this year is that when you're swapping, especially a support player, in and out, you know, when Missing and YCX are sharing scrim time, and when you're bringing YCX in here to take away, you know, potential communication opportunities, like, the team is just going to be worse, and every single player in that, you know, rotating door is just going to play worse. That has just been the reality of the situation every single time teams have rotated support. It's not a position you can 6-man. Both players are going to be worse because they're, you know, splitting time. You don't get that communication, you know, I guess, floor that you're supposed to have to be able to roam alongside the rest of your team, especially in this meta where a support's main job is to open up the map and play with their jungler. It's almost impossible to have as much synergy as whoever you're playing into if you don't practice as regularly. Moham and Xiaohao just became teammates. Like, they both got here like 2 weeks ago, not even like I don't know, like 5 days ago or whatever from this game. They both had significantly more synergy than Missing and Weiwei did together, which is frustrating. Add that on to the fact that Nya's not very good, that Sheer is one of the weaker top laners right now in lane in the LPL, and that 1xN has certainly not been able to keep his form up from the beginning of the year. LNG is just a disaster. They're the worst team in the LPL. There's not even a ton to talk about. I think this loss actually guarantees them bottom 2, bare minimum in the group. There is no way that they can actually now get themselves into the play-ins, but we knew that. This is going to be the worst team in Group Nirvana, and they're not going to be making playoffs. But Weibo technically still have their opportunities alive here. Again, IG and NIP are in the very dominant spots because of the way that they played in the first section of that round robin, but we're rolling through again. Technically, if Weibo wins out and one of those teams really underperforms, it could be possible for them to sneak into one of those spots, and Weibo is certainly a good enough team to, I think, take advantage of that if they do get there. Then moving on to our second series of day number 4, and another predictable outcome here is we saw LGD Gaming taking on Anyone's Legend, and AL is going to pick up the 2-0 victory. This is a good win to get, not a particularly surprising one where LGD had a couple of moments of joy. Hung, I think, played relatively well going into who is currently the big favorite to win MVP in Tarzan on the other side of this, but unfortunately, basically nobody else on LGD even really put up that much of a fight. AL was definitely the better team in terms of execution, and they didn't really, you know, look all that pressed in this one, I think is a fair way to say it. Game 1, I think, took maybe a little longer than you would have hoped, if only just because AL was in such a dominant position really throughout that entire game, and you've got Orianna and Poppy and Olaf in the later part of the game. It's just really hard for LGD to break through, but ultimately, AL ended up in the better spot, and they took advantage of some big weaknesses, we'll just say, on the other side of the matchup. Shanks is the obvious choice for MVP here, just a monstrous performance from him. That's really good to see because I don't think he was unbelievably good earlier this week, especially in that loss to WE. I think he really kind of let his team down in terms of some of the team fighting mistakes that he was making down the stretch. Certainly not nearly as bad as somebody like Breathe, or I guess Hope to a lesser extent, even though it wasn't entirely his fault. Shanks was generally okay, but watching him go into Tung Yuan and, kind of just be better than him in every single way. Once again, just Tung Yuan not really living up to kind of the hype he created for himself justifiably. I think he earned the hype that he got at the beginning of this split, but hasn't really been able to keep it going here. This was a very Shanks favored matchup. Orianna and Cassio were definitely, strong picks for him to be able to abuse some of these lane matchups. And when you're playing something like Victor into Cassiopeia, you can't really be down in the early game in the way that he was, but getting Cass super fed was a big priority for Tarzan and for AL, and I think Shanks very much paid that back out. Really good series for him. He's been pretty good this split. I think outside of that WE series, I really have not had any sort of major flaws with Shanks. He's absolutely going to be an all-pro mid laner, unless he just completely collapses down the stretch here. Tarzan continues to be good. Hung actually put in a really good effort. He was the only player on LGD side that I think had any sort of priority, but Tarzan, I think, did a good job of saying, whatever, man, who cares if you get some kills and some side lanes off of some dives? I'm going to get every objective, and I'm going to get more gold off of the plays that I'm cross-mapping. So, good stuff from Tarzan. We know that he's just got a really good understanding of where he needs to be on the map at any given time, and I thought he did a great job exploiting that. Hope and Kyle were really solid. Definitely the better bot lane duo, which is something we're going to talk about when we get to the LGD side. I think that has more to say about LGD than it does about AL, in my opinion, but Hope and Kyle, I think, did their jobs, and Breathe continues to be a player that we expected, right? He's not going to be a world beater on the top side. He's not as good, in my opinion, as Flandra or Bin. I think in isolation, he kind of fills a bit of a different role, but he's going to be fine enough. He's a really good team fighter that has a good head on his shoulders, is going to lose occasionally, but pretty uncommonly is going to make massive mistakes and is overall going to be fine enough on the top side for essentially half the price that you were paying for Flandra, which is always a big plus. So for AL, they look really good. This continues to look like a team that will be going to Worlds. Top 3 feel very secure right now. Then for LGD on the other side, obvious dud of the series here. Not really a ton of debate, I think, to go over. Xiaoya is the unquestionable choice for dud of the series. Miserable performance from Xiaoya. And I think we can start having the discussion that Xiaoya has just kind of been terrible throughout his time in Group Ascend, not only now, but also back in 2024. The first time he was in Group Ascend, he's just never been a good enough player to be able to survive at this level. And I think that's becoming especially clear right now in this split in summer of 2026, where he's just been awful. I mean, you look at his stats, he is like atrociously bad in almost all of them. We're going to talk about this a bit on one of the broadcasts for LPL English, so I guess you're getting a bit of a small spoiler here. Not that it really matters, because if you're a fan of this, then you're probably, if you're an hour, 9 minutes in, you're probably a big enough fan to not spoil it in the chat. But Xiaoya's stats are just horrific, man. It's the worst I've ever seen in AD carry statistically. I think he's one of 3 AD carries in a tier 1 or worlds qualifying region that is below 25% damage percentage for his team. It's just absurd how little impact this guy has, how bad he is in lane, how bad he's been out of lane. It's literally been Draven or bust going up against LGD for them on the bottom side. Crisp, I think, is getting a lot of the flame just generally because Crisp has higher expectations and the team has not really gotten better because of the addition of Crisp. But really, I mean, the big problem is that Xiaoya is just unquestionably the worst AD carry in Group Ascend, and that makes it really difficult for this team to ever really be able to play through him. He was just awful in this series. When Hope is Omega gapping you, that's how you know things are not going particularly well. I also do want to point out that Tung Yuan just did not play well in this series. I think he was okay in the first couple of minutes of laning phase, but the moment things got out of control for AL, or when Shanks was given a lot of resources to get a lead, Tung Yuan would then start bleeding resources inside lanes across the map. Just not a great performance from him. I continue to be on the train that he has really not been good over the past couple of weeks, and he needs to start getting back into the form he was in both last split and in week number 1, because I think a lot of people are remembering week number 1 when they hype up Tung Yuan. Bertle was fine, but not good. I think he made a ton of mistakes on the Vayne in game number 1 in the team fight phase, but overall, by that point, the game was kind of over. And then Hung was the only player actually generating resources again, but he was also by far the most aggressive player on the map for LGD and was also giving free kills over to players like Hope and Shanks and Breathe throughout a lot of this series. So LGD being worse, not surprising. AL being better, not surprising. This is kind of how you would expect this series to go. Not really a lot of shocking results here, and AL is going to be happy with the win. Then moving on to our final series of day number 4, and this was the final series that I got to cast over the course of week number 3. It was a matchup between Bilibili Gaming and Edward Gaming, and of course, BLG absolutely dominated this. There's not even really a ton to discuss. This will absolutely be my shortest overview of the video because, again, I've got 2 full hours of me covering this on the LPL English YouTube channel, and you can check that out there. And honestly, even if you missed that, I can cliff note this pretty fast. Like, this is a super easy series to talk about. BLG was better than EDG, and they They are a better team. This is the best team in Group Ascend versus the worst, although I guess maybe Top Esports is in that conversation after they beat BLG, whatever you want to say, right? We'll talk about that more in the power ranking segment. Shun's going to get player of the series. He completely ran the map on both Lee Sin and on Pantheon, maybe even more so on the Lee Sin in game number 1, where he just completely obliterated that early game, and basically every single fight that he took was an insta win. He was gliding throughout a lot of that game on the lead. Just nobody could even touch him. Jeja, I thought, was okay on the Skarner, but how are you ever supposed to play Skarner if Lee Sin gets Omega fed and gets a bunch of gold onto Jace and Ziggs? Like, you're just constantly going to get barraged in terms of how the side lanes go, and there's nothing you can really do about that. Credit to On, that was really good in that game on Camille as well. And credit to On throughout this series, who was really good on the Rakan. Viper was styling on the Xayah. Remember, this is his former org, his former team, especially with someone like Jeja returning to EDG, his former Worlds winning, teammate, I guess, with Jeja on the other side. I'm sure he was very excited for this matchup, and Viper certainly played like it. The Ziggs was really strong in game number 1, comboing really well off of the Lee Sin and Camille engages, and then obviously the Xayah was just, like I said, gliding in terms of his clicks, his posture, his positioning in a lot of the late game team fights, was really aggressive, but was never like overly aggressive, was always exactly spacing things as well as he possibly could on the Xayah Rakan, so credit to him. Weibo was really good, definitely the better top laner here. This is probably the last series he will be playing as a starter for Bilibili Gaming, and you know what? He did a more than admirable job as the starting top laner for a team that is trying to be the best in the world, considering he was somebody that was never supposed to be in this position in the first place. You got to give him a lot of credit. The only negative I have for BLG is that Knight really wasn't Knight this week. He was just a good mid laner. He wasn't really a great mid laner, which I think is strange. He was the weakest player on this team, in my opinion, throughout basically all of week number 3. Hopefully that changes. I say hopefully, it will change. Knight's going to get back into form. He doesn't just randomly drop out of form for long periods of time. Not really something he does. We know he can sometimes mentally check out, but man, he was playing against Edward Gaming. I'm not expecting him to like part the Red Sea. I just didn't want Bulldog to actually be as good as he was on the lock in game number 2. So for Knight, I hope it gets better, but for BLG, not really a ton better you can actually get from this series. As for Edward Gaming on the other side, ZDZ is the obvious choice, I think, for dud of the series. Just not a particularly good performance from him. I think some people are going to give it to Perukia for the Shen, like, KDA in game number 2, but as we were talking about during that cast, I do believe that he actually had a much better game on that Shen than it shows. I think his late game was useless. He was a false tank, like a fake tank, going into Xayah and Orianna and Mbessa, and obviously was never going to be able to survive as a frontliner in the back end of that game, but his early game was really good. He got multiple summoners. He got a flash mid lane. He got a flash bot lane, burned cleanse as well on the Xayah early on. Like, he was making all the early plays happen. It just kind of fell apart as the game continued to go longer. Leaves positioning on Xerath makes me want to, well, it makes me want to do things that I won't say on this channel. Leaves positioning on Ezreal, even worse. Why would you ever try to frontline on that champion? The amount of times that Lee Sin was engaging onto the Ezreal was astounding. How many Lee Sin Qs do you have to get hit by if you're Leave before you just go like, yeah, maybe I shouldn't be right next to my Skarner if I'm the Ezreal. It's just absolutely terrible stuff from him. He continues to be bad, but ZDZ just had no impact on this series as a whole. The Olaf wasn't very good. The Rumble wasn't very good in game number 1. Jeja, I think, was fine, but again, generally just completely outplayed by Shun, even if he himself was not a problem. And ironically enough, somehow, someway, Bulldog was probably the best player on the team in this series, if only for the lock game in game number 2, where he at least got a little bit of gold. The Syndra game, I don't think, was very good in game number 1, but you know what? That might be the first good game that Bulldog has played all split long, so happy for him. Happy to be able to talk that up at least a little bit. Outside of that, nothing good for Edward Gaming, who completely dropped to 0-7 and look like they are not only the worst team in Group Ascend, but they're right down there with LNG for the worst team in the LPL. And then obviously for BLG on the other side, they're hoping to get some confidence back and to regroup and be that number 1 team despite their loss to Top Esports. I think this team did want to go into the back end of the split undefeated, but I think they're going to be fine sitting in the position that they're in. The fact that they've still only suffered 1 loss, and now they're at least reportedly bringing in a top laner that should be able to increase their floor a considerable amount in Flandra for the next couple of weeks. That's already really exciting for Bilibili, and they absolutely, in my opinion, despite the loss, are still the team to beat in the LPL. But that's going to bring us to our final day of action here in the LPL in week number 3, and we kicked off our final day with a Group Nirvana matchup between Invictus Gaming and LNG Esports, where Invictus Gaming is going to be able to pick up the 2-0 victory, and they're going to be able to right the ship after their loss to NIP earlier this week. That obviously was not ideal for them. They really did not want to be a team that was, fighting it out to be the second team out of Group Nirvana, and I think especially with how bad Edward Gaming is, I think a lot of teams are like, yeah, we want to win Group Nirvana. We want to get our matchup with EDG so we can pretty much guarantee a spot up in the playoffs. Obviously, LGD doesn't look a ridiculous amount better right now, and I'm sure that obviously whoever the top two teams in Nirvana are going to be favorited to get themselves into playoffs, but IG still has a chance to be able to bounce their way back. Remember, it's double round robin in the regular season. They will get another matchup with NIP, and being able to pick up a 2-0 here keeps their game score in a really good state. For LNG, it's just disaster. I mean, everything we say about EDG up in Group Ascend, you can say about them down in Group Nirvana, except it's even worse for them because at least EDG gets this Hail Mary best of 5 play-in that they could potentially try and get into the playoffs with. LNG are just cooked, and this series confirms it. They are guaranteed now at 0-4 to not be top 2. They cannot make the play-ins no matter what. They are done after the regular season, which is, you know, unfortunate, but also incredibly expected if we're being honest when it comes to LNG in terms of the way they've played all year long. So let's talk about it here. Not really a ton to discuss in terms of like shocking ways that things broke down. The players that were bad were, you know, have been bad, and the players that were good were really good. The Shy continues to look great coming back from his hiatus. He is going to get player of the series here. He has unquestionably been the best top laner in Group Nirvana, and he's been probably one of the better top laners so far in the LPL throughout this split, considering how weak in general that role has looked. And it's good to see him be back into form. I think people really wanted him to be, you know, that top tier player that we kind of remember from the regular season in summer of last year. He didn't necessarily perform like that at Worlds, and I think that was a big letdown to a lot of people. I think that's a big part of why he maybe took some time off at the beginning of this year. That and the fact that he's obviously just an incredibly lucrative streamer. I'm honestly shocked he came back to play Group Nirvana League of Legends at all professionally because of how much money he makes on his streaming career. But, you know, he wanted the competition. He comes back to this org, gets to play with Rookie again, and he's looking really good. He's looking like the best player on this team, which I think is a really important sign. Again, top lane is very beatable right now in the LPL. So if you have a player like the Shy that's not only very mechanically talented, but is very willing to try and generate those own advantages on his own, I think that that's really important for your chances of being able to continue to separate yourself in the LPL. So the Olaf, the Rumble, both of it looking great. Sheer is not the most difficult of competition, as I think we've learned over the course of this year, but he was honestly fine in this series. He was arguably the best player on LNG, at least in terms of proactivity, and so the Shy being better than him, I think, is a good look. Awesome and Mako also did turn it around in this series. I got really concerned watching them play into Ninjas and Pyjamas because they were just so bad in that series that I was like, oh no, if this bot lane's actually just as bad as it was with Jiachi and Mako, then I don't think this team's going to be anywhere near the World Championships, which is their goal. But Awesome and Mako, I think, definitely showed, okay, well, 1xN and Missing might not be in their best form. It's clear that those players have kind of mentally checked out in terms of the way they're playing, but they definitely stepped up and took advantage of that in this series. I think specifically you're looking at the Jhin and the Karma in game number 2 is really being excellent from them and being able to utilize that big poke advantage that you're going to have when the Shen roams and it's just Syndra in a side lane by herself, and really kind of utilizing that advantage to get the Jhin super fed. The Kaisa was also really good. I think in game number 1, not really a lot of negatives I can give Awesome. This is the kind of way he needs to play all split long if they want any chance of being able to make Worlds. Mako's in a similar spot. I think he was overrated throughout a lot of split 2. I think expectations have come back to reality in terms of the way he's playing in split 3. I don't think he's played all that different from how he was playing in split 2. I think people are just kind of waking up to the fact that maybe he wasn't as good because he has a better AD carry now, so you can't just put your entire, you know, sense of blame onto the ADC, but they're hopefully going to be fine. And again, they need to continue to level up as a duo going forward if this team wants to be good enough to, again, not just make playoffs, but actually make the regional finals and try to get themselves to Worlds. Rookie and Wei were also okay. It's always funny to watch Wei versus Wei in a matchup like this, but I don't think the middle of the map really mattered all that much in this series. Rookie was good, but the Shy was really the carry, and Awesome was definitely the secondary carry in this series. So for Invictus, it's a nice win, and it's an important one to get, especially 2-0 to keep their game score in a good position. As for LNG on the other side, this bot lane was terrible. Not even really a lot of like promising things that I can say about it. 1xN has completely checked out, and you can see it in the way that he's playing. He is dead of the series for me. Just a really bad performance from him. Not only was he completely outclassed in the laning phase in both game 1 and game 2, which is kind of to be expected when you're playing Syndra into, you know, Jhin, Karma, and your support's a Shen who's going to be roaming and doesn't really have any combat power in the 2v2. But even on top of that, his team fighting was just really bad. He was out of position and way too far forward in a lot of instances. It just doesn't feel like he is like trying 100% right now, which again, I can't really blame him for. This LNG team is terrible, and he's been stuck on this organization all year long. I wish that he was on a team like IG instead, but Awesome got the role, and 1xN unfortunately is just kind of a piece now. Hopefully this is not a sign of things to come for him moving forward, because he's just not been good at all throughout this split. I'm going to attribute that mostly to how bad his team has been rather than him being any meaningfully worse than he was at the beginning of the year. Missing, I think, is a part of why this bot lane has been so bad. I very narrowly gave Missing yet another dead of the series. He is going to be in contention for dead of the week, despite the fact that he's only down in Group Nirvana because they barely get any games, and missing was awful in both of the series that they played this week. Just doesn't seem to be a competent support in this meta now that we've moved away once again from 2v2 pressure. On the bottom side of the map, Nya is the worst mid laner in the LPL, even worse than Bulldog, although I think it is a competition. Nya just doesn't do anything even remotely average. Weibo was okay, and so was Sheer, quite frankly, on the top side, despite the fact that the Shy was so good on the other side of the matchup, but you're not going to be able to save the series on the top side unless you're the Shy and unless the team plays around you in the way that IG likes to play around him. When your mid laner is bad, when your bot lane's getting destroyed, and when your jungler is, for the most part, completely ineffective going into a player that somehow is like a more aggressive version of you, despite the fact that Wei is not aggressive as a jungler at all. It's just a big problem for LNG. They're the worst team in the LPL. Despite how bad Edward Gaming look, they could look this bad in Group Nirvana, which is what LNG are doing. And Invictus obviously are a team that are expecting themselves to get into a good spot. I keep bringing up Worlds with this team, but I think it's important to keep bringing up Worlds because that is ultimately the goal. You're not bringing the Shy and Rookie and Awesome into this team if your expectation is not to contend to make the World Championships, to make the regional finals, and that starts with being the best team in Group Nirvana. They may have lost a lot of momentum, I think, losing to NIP earlier this week, but hopefully they're able to regain at least some of that with this win here. Then moving on to our second series of day number 5 here, and our second series was again a predictable outcome, but a fun way to get there. It was ThunderTalk Gaming taking on Top Esports, and Top Esports is going to pick up the 2-0 victory. They looked really good across this week. Maybe it's an odd week thing. Maybe week 2 was just a little bit of an outlier for them. It wasn't even really all that bad of a week. They just lost to Anyone's Legend, who is a good team, but Top Esports has absolutely re-cemented themselves as one of the big favorites here in the LPL. I mean, beating BLG is no easy task, and then obviously, you know, you kind of expect a team that beats BLG to come out and destroy ThunderTalk, but with Top Esports, you never really know. You always want to see them be able to follow up their big victory with something else, and I think they did that here against ThunderTalk, who just did not have the talent, unfortunately, to be able to compete with Top Esports. They did put up a good fight. Once again, I think Junhao is a good player and continues to be very interesting and very fun to watch at this level, but they didn't really have anybody else that could compete with TES, and that was a major problem for them in this series. So we'll quickly talk about it again here because not really a ton to discuss other than Zweon continuing to be unbelievable. We're going to get to this when we get to ThunderTalk as well, but massive top gap in this series, just not even remotely close between these two teams. Zweon was absolutely the better of these two top laners, and he absolutely crushed Keshi in this matchup. Keshi is definitely susceptible to some solo deaths, as we've talked about a lot throughout this year. He may have a lot of pop-off moments, a lot of really good showcases in lane, and he can get some pretty big gold leads, but he will make some mistakes, and those mistakes are almost always really costly. Honestly, the comparison I want to make is he's kind of like the Leave of top lane. I think that that's actually a pretty apt way to maybe describe the way that Keshi is played. He does remind me a lot of Harry. Like when he was a rookie, Harry obviously never really panned out. He got worse basically every single year, and now he's obviously out of the league, or I guess probably out of the league. He was on OMG throughout a lot of this year, but Keshi is just a player that has a lot of upside, but doesn't really know what to do with it and how to put it together for long extended periods of time. And Zweon might genuinely just be the best top laner in the LPL right now. Again, like the way he is performing in a role that doesn't really have any standout players is spectacular. I mean, he's going to be in the running for MVP, I think, throughout a lot of this split. A lot of people aren't really thinking about like MVP and All-Pro and stuff, but we're over halfway done with the split, and I don't think anyone's going to be contesting Zweon for first team All-Pro. I think it would take a monumental effort both from him and from somebody else, him to go down and somebody else to come up to even have any sort of conversation about first team All-Pro, considering just how good he's been in the first half and how much better he's been than every other top laner in the first half. But again, with that kind of performance, with the value that he's brought to a top esports team that's near the top of the standings, I think he is going to have some sort of MVP conversation by the end of this split, especially if he keeps playing like this. He has been truly phenomenal for this team, and in a role where I don't think it's really all that easy to affect the game and affect the map in the way that he's been able to. That Rumble game in game 1 was ridiculously good. Zhuo was very important. Both Zhuo and Jackie Love were excellent on the Ashe plus whatever throughout a lot of this week. In the previous series, it was, you know, Jackie Love's Ashe that really got to stand out, and in this one, it was definitely Zhuo's Lulu that was a little bit more notable, I think, alongside the Orianna, because those two together are basically unbeatable in terms of being a combo. But Zweon continues, in my opinion, to be the most dominant player on Top Esports, getting his own individual leads and then really pushing that to its absolute limit throughout a lot of these games. Zhuo, like I said, was excellent alongside Jackie Love. These two continue to grow and kind of reestablish their chemistry together from many, many years ago. Zhuo, I still think, is a downgrade to Feng Yue, who we are seeing do unbelievably well down in Group Nirvana, but It's clear Jackie Love can really elevate basically anybody that he's playing with at this point, and Joao, I think, is certainly holding his weight. He's not been like an albatross or anything like that. I think his performance against BLG was really exciting. Cream was better than Haru. That's what we expected. Haru hopes one day, I think, to be the player that Cream is. I think he's built in that archetype, and you kind of hope that he can grow into that. We'll see. Cream has obviously become one of the best mid laners in the world, so maybe Haru, even with his strides, can get somewhere close one day, and then Tien, I think, was also much better than he was in the previous series against BLG here. Junhao put up a good fight. He was a strong jungler and was generating resources, especially in game 1 on the Lee Sin, but Tien definitely had much better map control, and that aggression, that greediness, that ability to get everything on the map, that very much came into play for top esports. So nice win for them. Zweon continues to be an absolute menace on the top side, and for Thunder Talk on the other side, Keshi is obviously dead of the series. It was just a massive top gap. The dude went 2-12-1 in this series. I mean, it's just a miserable performance from him, but it's going to happen every once in a while. That is the problem when you take a risk on high upside rookies that have a lot of mechanical talent but are not particularly consistent. When that consistency rolls on the low end on any particular series, it's going to look pretty terrible, and I think that was the case here with Keshi. Obviously, I think he's a better player than this would indicate. He's honestly been mostly okay throughout a lot of this split, but again, a player that I think is going to get hyped up a little more than maybe he deserves. That inconsistency and those bad moments definitely still stick out to me. Haru also kind of regressing back to the mean in this one. Going against Cream is a pretty bad matchup, and putting him on things like Ryze and Ahri that kind of have to be really aggressive in side lanes, it's just not taking advantage of Haru's skill set all that much. Still not a terrible series from him. On and Feather, I think, definitely weren't nearly as good, but I don't know, man. Jackie Love and Joel are like the one bot lane I'm okay with On and Feather not looking good against, because that's just kind of how things go. Even on the Xerath and the Shen in game number 1, they got Lulu'd in game number 2, which I think is a fair way to describe it. Junhao was crazy aggressive, ended up almost leading his team in deaths. Keshi, unfortunately, kind of outpacing him in that regard, but Junhao came pretty darn close, but he also was the player that was creating by far the most amount of action for the team and was really the only one trying to push the pace of the game forward in favor of Thunder Talk. They just were outclassed everywhere else. So for Thunder Talk, it is what it is. Like, I still like this team, and their win over WE is still very important, but Top Esports is just a little bit out of their pay grade in terms of a team that they're going to be able to beat. TES looked fantastic throughout all of week number 3, and all we can really hope is that this team, and Zweon in particular on the top side, can keep this pace up, because they look a lot better than even I thought they were going to be this split. That's going to bring us to our final series of the week, and it's a pretty damn good one. It's probably the most interesting series of the week, at least for me, from a standings perspective. It was JD Gaming taking on Team WE, and JD Gaming are going to pick up the 2-0 victory. They are going to pretty roundly prove themselves to be the better team against WE, and they are going to get themselves very much back into the world's conversation. I got some comments last week. I'm not surprised that I got these comments. I talked about them a lot in the video, but I got some comments last week that were like, why are you leaving JDG in the top 4? They're clearly not a top 4 team. And I said, hold the process, boys. Let's chill out here. It feels like a lot of things have kind of gone against them at the start of this split. I haven't really seen enough from this team to believe that their flaws are going to be sustainable in the same kind of way that they were. And that matchup against WE was the one I was really waiting for. I said, next week, if they lose to WE, I'm moving them out of the top 4. They are no longer going to be a team I expect to go to Worlds, and they will have proven themselves by going 0-2 against WE in the regular season to not be a team that, has that kind of upside. Well, here we are with them, quite frankly, destroying WE in this series, being the significantly better team, kind of gapping them in a lot of different ways, and I think a lot of the optimism around JDG has been revived. This team might not be perfect, and this was an easy week for them, but let's not forget that the reason their record was so bad was because they hadn't gotten any of their easy games. Yeah, they lost to AL, they lost to Top Esports, they lost to Bilibili Gaming. They're supposed to be losing those series. They're not supposed to be losing to WE, and they didn't do that here, so that's good. For WE, they looked terrible this week. I mean, truly, they looked awful throughout all of this week. They were miraculous enough to be able to pick up a victory over AL in that weird series where they were the weaker team by far, but were able to make some comebacks. But the reality is that WE just did not have a very good week number 3. You're hopeful that that's not going to last, but so much of their success is tied to Monkey, and he was just awful across week number 3. So that is a big problem. For JDG, player of the series is going to go to Honkyu in the mid lane. Through all of their struggles, through all of their ups and downs, through how bad the beginning of this split was, Honkyu has consistently still been good for this team. He really did not take a step back at all, in my opinion, at any point in this split. He was consistently actively winning in the mid lane and, proving himself to be a strong laner, a good side laner, and had a good understanding of where he needed to be on the map. It's just that his jungler and his bot lane were consistently running it down. His top laner was really bad. Basically, everybody else on the roster was underperforming in some meaningful way, and so Honkyu kind of got dragged down alongside the rest of his team. From a reputation perspective, he has still been one of the better mid laners in the LPL, just from a raw laning and performance perspective. When you isolate isolate him in terms of his performance from the rest of the team. And now that everybody else seems to be getting back on board, Gala had a fantastic week. I think Junja is definitely starting to get a lot more comfortable again. Hongq can really show that a lot of those good performances he had for a majority of the beginning of the split are real, that he still is that good player that he was throughout the beginning part of this year. I know he can be relatively inconsistent, but this team is no longer playing these like Maokai Yone comps where they're relying on him like basically as their solo carry throughout a lot of these games because players like Xiaoshu and Gala were just not super consistent throughout the beginning part of this year. Now they're opening up the map a bit more, allowing Junja to be more of an engager for the team, and Gala has stepped up being that primary or secondary carry in a lot of these games, something JDG didn't have the luxury of being able to do because Gala wasn't very good at the beginning part of this year. And I think that's allowed Hongq to be more of what he actually is, which is like a 1.5 kind of carry. Like he is the kind of player that can be your like 1.5 the best player. I know that's a weird way to put it, but like I think you know what I mean. Like you don't really want him to ever be your clear number one option with no other, player that can usurp him in that role. But he is really good in the role where he can be your number one option on a game-to-game basis, but it's nice to have somebody else that can pull away some of that pressure with him as well. That's why Gala stepping up, I think, has been so important for JDG, and Hongq definitely paying that back out, specifically on the Syndra in game number 2. Just one of the best games that we saw all week. I mean, truly a phenomenal Syndra performance. Hongq has been really good all year long, but this was definitely, one of those moments that I'm going to go, okay, if you can play like this, you can be one of the best players in the LPL. Pure end of story. Like, this was fantastic. Xiaoshu deserves a big shout out. He was awful in their first couple series this week, despite the fact that I think JDG was doing well in those series. It's good to see that he can play Rumble and Olaf into, yes, Cube, who is not a great player, but he did have a good week and was relatively hot coming into this series and actually step up and just kind of dominate and carry this series. He was excellent in game number 1 on the Rumble. I think Broadcast ended up giving him player of the series, mostly probably for that Rumble game in game number 1, because that game was closer, and I think the Rumble play ended up mattering more down the stretch, but ultimately I thought Hongq was just a little bit stronger in the game that mattered a little bit more. Gala was excellent across this entire week. Like, where has this guy been, man? Like, I know I was low on Gala coming into the year, and I kind of got proven really correct on that, but I was shocked by just how bad he was, I think, for a majority of this year, and certainly how bad he was at the start of this split. Like, back in week 1, this guy was dragging the team down alongside Junja. Neither of them were playing well. His positioning was terrible. He had an awesome week number 3, and I'm hopeful that he's going to be able to keep this up because he looked really good, basically in every single game he played, and that was really important for JDG. He's going to be in the running for player of the week. That is absolutely for certain. Vampire, Junja, I think they did their jobs as well. Overall, just a good showcase for JDG and a 3-0 week that they desperately needed to get back into their rightful place in the top 4 in terms of the standings. This is the turnaround that I think people were waiting on for JDG, and it absolutely came to fruition. As for WE on the other side, obviously Monkey was terrible across this week. They even won a series, and yet somehow he was dud of the series in all 3 of the series that they played this week. He just was not good, and that is a massive problem for WE. Again, if they weren't bailed out by anyone's legend, people would be doom posting about WE with the way they played. And the biggest issue for me is that this team relies so heavily on Monkey as a player just in concept. We saw that in the playoffs, that when Monkey turned his form around, all of a sudden WE is now a team that can make top 3 and they can beat BLG and AL in the playoffs. But when Monkey was bad in the regular season, they completely fall apart. Well, the bad Monkey stints have come back through. The Nefiri, the Xin Zhao, both of these games were terrible, specifically the Xin Zhao in game number 2. Just really bad stuff. I mean, when this guy is not on, he drags the team down with him because his early game invades just completely lose his team the game, and he really doesn't have a great awareness of where he needs to be in the mid to late game unless he actually has gold. It's just really hard to imagine a world where Monkey is like a super consistent player because his style is so specific. He has to get leads in the early game in order to be effective, and when teams have been able to figure that out and have been able to kind of take him out of his own comfort zone, he has just been awful. Now, maybe he just turns it back around, and maybe those early plays start to work a bit more because he gets a bit more creative. That's what happened in the playoffs, but I hope it doesn't take a playoff run in order for Monkey to figure it out again. He was so good at the start of this split. It felt like WE's progress was so real, and now it has come crashing back down because Monkey has come crashing back down. Now, Cube was also terrible. He has been an anchor for this team, somehow has been the best player on this team across this week, and that was very much not true here. This was a matchup that I think in terms of recent form he could have taken advantage of, but losing it as heavily as he did, especially on the Cassante in game number 1, was certainly not ideal. Arha was not great about, I think was the only player that was trying to generate momentum, and I think he actually was okay in this series, but Gala was definitely better. And Karis, I think, was just kind of a below average mid laner in terms of Group Ascend standards over the course of this week. I don't think he made any massive errors in the way that Monkey and even like Arha did throughout times in this week, but he wasn't better than any of the players he played into. He was weaker than Shanks. He was certainly weaker than Haru in that matchup against Thunder Talk. Like, it just was not a very good week overall for Karis, and certainly wasn't better than Hongq. He wasn't awful, he just wasn't good either, and that's the big thing for WE, is we kind of expected this level of regression. I've had them number 6 in my power rankings for quite a while. I do think they're a good team, but I've expected them to be like good enough to make the playoffs and probably not good enough to make Worlds or something like that, and that does kind of seem to be the reality. They might be even worse than that if Monkey doesn't get his form back, but for now I'm going to give them some patience and say it's just 1 week. Hopefully they can bounce back. But for JDG, I gave them a lot of patience throughout the beginning part of the split, and now they reward it, I think, by going 3-0 this week. And I think specifically this 2-0 over WE was kind of the proof of the pudding of like, okay, they still are the 4th best team currently in Group Ascend. WE hasn't quite eclipsed them in terms of that just yet. Obviously, there's still a lot that this team needs to get better at. The inconsistency has been a massive problem for them. The good games aren't necessarily a worry, but it's really about, can we get these good games out a lot more frequently? My only positive is that Tabe has seemed to have gotten through to some of these players. Hongq has generally been good all split long, and if Junja and Hongq can link up again, if Gala is going to be that positive primary or secondary carry, and if Xiaoshu and Vampire can just survive in their own individual roles, JDG should be a team that is good enough at the core foundation to be one of the, world's representatives from the LPL. All right, but that is going to do it for my LPL Week 3 overview and analysis video. Up on the screen, the updated standings after 3 weeks of action. We have our Group Ascend and Group Nirvana teams really pretty in the clear, I'm going to say, in terms of where they're going to sit. Obviously, it's not quite as clean as maybe it was last week because teams like JDG have very much punched their way back up. WE is falling down now, potentially into bottom 4 if things don't continue to go their way. And, unlike Group Nirvana, Ascend isn't quite as, done and dusted just yet. Group Nirvana definitely in a much more clear spot in terms of where these teams are landing, but still quite a bit of things to talk about. I think that is a fair way to say it, and you can see that in my personal power rankings, which is the first column to the right of every single team. In the column right after that, you can see change, which is how they have changed from last week to this week. We can go over any risers and fallers. Notably, once again, I'm swapping top esports and anyone's legend. I don't feel comfortable in this. They are clearly number 2 and number 3 in the power rankings for me. Whatever order you want to put them in, I think is kind of up to you. I did get a little spooked by AL's loss to WE just because I think that was such a winnable series, and obviously that also kind of plays into their favor because they did so many things right in the early game despite the fact that they didn't win, but also they should have won at least one of those games, especially game number 2 up 9,000 gold going into the late game. Somehow losing that is honestly just not acceptable, and so with Top Esports being the team to take down BLG and give them their first loss of the split, and also getting into first place technically in terms of the standings, they're going to move up to number 2. BLG is staying at number 1. I still feel like they're the team that's going to win the split, despite Top Esports beating them, especially because Flandra is coming in and should theoretically be an upgrade to the team on the top side. JDG will stay at number 4 because I had faith in them before this week. There's no reason to take that faith away considering that they went 3-0 and basically did everything they were supposed to do. They only dropped 1 game throughout the entire week as well. 6 in 1 week in terms of game score is really good to get themselves back to neutral. But we do have some changes outside of the top 4, at least right outside of the top 4. Ninjas in Pyjamas with their win over Invictus are going to jump up to number 5. I do believe of any team outside of the top 4 right now, NIP is the team I would most expect to make the World Championships if it's not going to be JDG or AL or Top Esports. If one of those teams flames out, I think NIP would be the team that's ready to capitalize with how well they played. The fact that Fodic is this high up in the power rankings is genuinely absurd, but just kind of the reality of the way NIP have played. Care is on fire right now with the way that he's playing. The only reason he's not been a contender for player of the week or anything like that is because this team only plays 1 series per week. And unfortunately, that's just tough in terms of getting player of the week. But IG going to drop down to number 6 after their loss. And that means that WE is dropping down to number 7. This is a team that definitely has some major question marks. If Monkey is not going to be very good like he wasn't across this week, this team basically has no chance of being relevant in the playoffs. They need him to be a top tier player, and he was not over the course of this week. Not many changes outside of that other than Thunder Talk jumping above LGD. We got confirmation this week that Thunder Talk was a better team because they were able to beat LGD. This really matters in terms of getting top 6 because remember, it's only bottom 2 in Group Ascend that need to go into the play-in stage. All of top 6 automatically make the playoffs, and that's really important because not only does it guarantee you a playoff spot no matter what, but because bottom 2 teams, like the 2 teams coming out of the play-ins, are immediately slotted into lower bracket, that means that if you're 6th place in the regular season, you have that extra life in the playoffs, which, the bottom 2 teams aren't going to get, even if they do win in the play-in. So Big win for ThunderTalk to get up to number 9, and EDG and LNG are clearly bottom 2. LNG, unfortunately, eliminated from the postseason. It is impossible for them to finish top 2 in Group Nirvana. They cannot make even the play-ins at this point, and so they're just playing for pride moving forward. Let me know, do you agree or do you disagree with my power rankings? I'm always curious to know your thoughts and opinions on everything. Is anybody too high? Is anybody too low? Let me know. I'm curious to know your thoughts and opinions down below. But let's go ahead and move on to my player of the week and my dud of the week for week number 3. Player of the week was kind of an easy choice. It's going to weigh on the top laner for Top Esports. What a week for Top Esports just in general, taking down BLG, cementing themselves right now as number 1 in the standings, even if, obviously that might not hold throughout the entire rest of the regular season. And Zweon was unquestionably their best player. He is absolutely the best top laner in the LPL right now, at least until someone like Flandra comes in and establishes his spot. He's been better than players like Breathe and Xiaoshu that we might think, would have a spot like that. He has just been great. Now, he was a bit of a Rumble merchant throughout this week, but remember, this is the nerfed Rumble. Rumble's still strong, but he's not the Omega pick he was at the beginning of the year. He was really good in all 3 series on the Rumble, and things like the Olaf as well, and you can maybe say small champion pool bias, but I don't know, man, he's been pretty good for a while, and I think this week was really the one where you go, okay, if you can sustain this level of play, you're going to be an MVP candidate down the stretch of the regular season. My honorable mentions this week: Gala, the AD carry for JD Gaming. JDG going 3-0 and really getting themselves back on track was really important, but Gala to me being the most important part of that because he was so bad at the beginning of the year, or at the beginning of the split, I should say, for JDG. Him being so good and so important for JDG is a big reason why they were so consistent across this week as both a primary and a secondary carry. They need him to be relevant, and he very much was. And then Junhao, the jungler for ThunderTalk. You got to give him a lot of credit, man. ThunderTalk has been a lot more explosive and a lot more fun than I ever thought they were going to be, and pretty much all of it is because of Junhao. Now, Haru, I think, has also made a ton of strides. Haru was almost this honorable mention slot, but I think Junhao was the better player from ThunderTalk, and I definitely wanted to reward at least one of them. So for now, Junhao and Gala are going to be my honorable mentions, and then my dud of the week is unfortunately going to go to Monkey, the jungler for WE. It really could not have gone a different way. They only lost 2 series, and somehow he ended up with 3 dud of the series. This is just a nightmare week for Monkey. He did not play well at all, and it was directly correlating to how bad WE generally looked, especially in the early game. This team relies so much on being able to snowball games out of control because their macro just isn't very explosive. We'll just say in the back end of games, they were bailed out a little bit by Anyone's Legend just randomly dropping that game number 2. But the reality is that this team should have gone 0-3 this week, and they should be in the bottom 4 in terms of their standings. They got pretty lucky. I don't think they're going to get lucky again, and Monkey can't really get away with playing as bad as he did across this week. Poor Missing, was very much in the running for this despite only playing 2 series because he was so bad in those 2 series. But luckily for him, Monkey is going to get dud of the week, and Zweon is going to get player of the week. But that's going to do it for my week 3 analysis here in the LPL. I do hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, leave a like. It really does mean a lot to me. Lets me know you guys are enjoying the content, and it does help get this video out to a lot more people, which I'm always very appreciative of. If you're new here, hit the subscribe button. Of course, we're going to be covering every single LPL game as we always do on this channel throughout every part of the regular season and the playoffs, but it's not just the LPL. We also cover the LCS, the LEC, the LCK, and the NACL Tier 2 over in North America. So if you want a comprehensive overview of everything going on in LoL Esports, this is the place for it. Hit subscribe and hit that bell so you can be notified when those videos do go live. But with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day, and I will see you all later.